Chapter 5:27. He originally thought that Yang Chendong would not let him go so easily. Who would have thought that he would allow him to leave just like that? Was this confidence or arrogance? But no matter what, it was best to escape from this place. Li Yuanlong immediately stood up and nodded. Rest assured, Duke of Loyalty, I know what to do. Li Yuanlong finally left. Until he left, Yang Chendong did not even stand up from his chair once. He only called for Tiger's mane outside the tent and asked him to send the crown prince of Jiaoji away. If he did not do so, Li Yuanlong would not be able to safely return to the city. Tiger's mane quickly returned. Young master, I have sent him away. Returning to report was not the main reason. His main purpose was to ask about the negotiations and what the mercenaries were going to do next. Yang Chendong, who was very clear about Tiger's mane's thoughts, nodded lightly and then ordered, inform all the officers to attack the city at noon tomorrow. Yang Chendong was very clear that Li Yuanlong and his father, Li Li, would definitely not agree to his conditions, surrendering without even putting up a fight. Even an incapable ruler would find it difficult to make such a decision, let alone the Li father and son who boasted of their abilities. But he still let Li Yuanlong leave. Perhaps only he himself knew the reason behind this. Yang Chendong did this intentionally. He wanted to set an example for others. He could give anyone a chance, but there was only one chance. If you did not grasp it, the consequences would be unimaginable. In this way, when other small countries used the same method on them, they would seriously consider it. As long as one small country surrendered without a fight, tonight's matter would not have been in vain. This was Yang Chendong's intention. He cared about the future and the situation in the future. However, Li Yuanlong, who couldn't see this, arrived at the foot of the city wall in a panic. He sat on the hanging basket and returned to the city tower. Soon, he appeared in front of his father, Li Li. The crown prince returned. In the temporary palace, Lily wasn't the only one who didn't rest. None of the civil and military officials were resting. They were waiting for the crown prince to return. They wanted to see what kind of demands he had made, how they would respond, and what concessions they would make. As soon as he entered the temporary hall, Li Yuanlong could feel hundreds of eyes looking at him. If it was in the past, he would be secretly happy to be the center of attention, but at this moment, he was a little annoyed by the way people were staring at him. Dragoni, how is it? This time, before anyone else could ask, King Lily spoke first. Just from this point alone, it was clear that he had lost his usual composure. This was not Li Li's fault, and it had nothing to do with his age. All of this was because after Crown Prince Li Yuanlong had left the city and discussed with the generals, he had been shocked to discover that they had no way to deal with the mercenaries, nor did they see any hope of victory. This was what caused Lily to be shocked. Could it be that other than negotiation and compromise, there was no other way? It was because of this that he placed all his hopes on his son, hoping that Li Yuanlong could bring him a good result. Even though he knew that the mercenaries would definitely demand an exorbitant price, he still hoped that they would be more polite. After all, weren't the Han people used to learning from Confucianism, talking about moderation, talking about the demeanor of a great country, and forgiving people when possible? As long as you expressed your acceptance, you would usually receive their forgiveness. Perhaps it was because of this that when the Han people were weak, so many people would stand up to bully them, repaying evil with good. This was what the Han people were most willing to do. Often, doing this would bring them a good reputation. But did they not think about how to repay kindness? Of course, this was a bit off topic. When Li Yuanlong heard his father personally ask, he didn't know how to answer. He stood there for a long time without making a sound. Li Yuanlong's silence made King Lily very anxious. Dragoni, what is the situation? Did you not see the Ming dynasty's Duke of Loyalty and Courage? Shaking his head, Li Yuanlong said, "I saw him." "You saw him? Then what did he say?" Lily let out a sigh of relief. But seeing that Li Yuanlong didn't say anything for a long time, he couldn't help but say anxiously, "Did he put forward some harsh conditions? What is going on? Say something." Not only was the king anxious, but the other officials were also anxious, waiting for Li Yuanlong's answer. First, he took a deep breath. Perhaps he also knew that some things were unavoidable. Rather than not saying anything and letting everyone guess, he might as well say it openly. Perhaps before there was no way out, everyone could still unleash their potential and defeat the mercenaries. This prince saw him, and he only made one request. In the following time, Li Yuanlong described the process of his meeting with Yang Chendong in detail. His memory was quite good, and he didn't miss anything. But because of this, these words had a great impact on everyone. Perhaps no one would have thought that the other party's appetite was so big. At some point, King Lily had returned to his large chair, and his expression was terrifyingly ugly. The other officials weren't any better. Apart from a few low-ranking officials who were still whispering and expressing their opinions, some of the more shrewd and capable officials were silent, standing there with gloomy expressions. To them, negotiation was their only hope. As long as the other party could retreat, Jiaoji would have a chance to start over. As for what they would have to pay for this, there was nothing they could do about it. Who asked their enemies to be mercenaries, who asked them to send troops to Nanming first, and who asked the assassin called Emo Tua to be a Jiaoji citizen. Based on this, it was only right for them to pay a price, or rather, there was nothing they could do. But now, Yang Chendong wanted the entire Jiaoji, and this was something they didn't want to see. Killing people was nothing more than a nod of the head, not to mention the fact that they were the ones being killed. Now, they didn't even have a way out for themselves. How could they, who already felt wronged, accept such conditions? No, we can't admit defeat like this. Our military strength is more than 10 times that of theirs, and we can still fight. Chun Heijin, the famous general of the Jiaoji army, was the first to voice his opinion. Yes, we can't admit defeat. Even if we die in battle, we can't be scared to death. Another famous general of Jiaoji, Fan Yuhai, also expressed his opinion, and his opinion was the same as Chun Heijin's. With these two taking the lead, the military's opinion was very clear, and this brought hope to King Lily. How confident are you that you can defeat the mercenaries? Facing the king's question, the two generals looked at each other, then shook their heads in unison. After witnessing the might of the mercenaries' firearms, how could they still have the confidence to defeat their opponents? Then, how confident are you that you can defend the city? Although Lily was a little disappointed, he knew that this wasn't the fault of the two generals. The mercenaries were just too strong, completely beyond the strength of this era. It was like when the Qing dynasty fought against the Eight-Nation Alliance. No matter how many soldiers you had, when cold weapons faced hot weapons, you had no chance of winning. I don't know, but we have to defend it. If we really can't, we can use people to fill in the gaps. If the Southern Ming Emperor's decree arrives earlier, perhaps things will turn for the better. Fan Yuhai shook his head. Then he gave everyone hope. That was, they still had outside help. Speaking of which, it was a little funny. This outside help was actually the Southern Ming regime that they had always regarded as their enemy, and they had taken advantage of them. This was something that couldn't be helped. If they didn't rely on the Southern Ming, Jiaoji wouldn't exist anymore. One had to know that this was different from when they submitted to the Great Ming. At that time, they only submitted on the surface, and at most, the Great Ming would send a few officials to hold down the fort. They still had full autonomy. If the time was right, it would be easy for them to revolt. However, If they surrendered to the mercenaries, their future would be uncertain. Perhaps Jiaoji would never have the chance to rise again. Fan Yuhai placed his hopes on the southern Ming, and King Lili also had some hope. However, after thinking about it, it seemed that this was the only way. He could only helplessly say, "All right, since that's the case, then prepare for war. Prepare the trebuchets in the city. Even if we can't hit them, we can at least use them as a deterrent. Also, when we fight, we must set up a powerful supervision team. Today's scene of the defeated army retreating must not happen again." Before the crown prince came back, when everyone talked about today's battle, they more or less felt that it was a pity. In their opinion, if the soldiers didn't fear death and continued to charge forward, they might be able to reach the mercenaries. If that was the case, they might be able to see the hope of victory. The king had made a decision, and that was to fight. Then they would stall for time until the southern Ming emperor stopped the mercenaries. In order to achieve this goal, Li Li first took out his own 30,000 king's guards. Then the crown prince also took out his 20,000 elite crown soldiers. Then there were Chun Heijin's 25,000 black soldiers and Fan Yuhai's 20,000 elephant soldiers. Together, there were 100,000 elite soldiers. In addition, there were 100,000 regular soldiers. If they had to stall, they should be able to resist for a while. Chapter 528. The meeting lasted until late at night. Only then did the officials leave the temporary palace and head back to their temporary residences. It could be seen that every official who walked out of the palace had a dignified expression, but at the same time, there were some whose eyes flickered as if they were thinking about something. Among them, there was one whose face was gloomy all the way home. It wasn't until the door of the residence closed from the inside that he relaxed and sat down on the wooden chair in the study room with a plop. Then he slowly exhaled a long breath of air. He sat on the chair as if his body had fallen apart. Even the kerosene lamp in the study was slightly lit. This was a habit of his. He liked to think in the dark. But this time, a ghost-like voice appeared beside his ear. "Lord Chen, are you feeling very vexed?" "Who is it?" Lord Chen stood up as if there was a spring installed under his butt. His face was filled with panic. Then, cold sweat dripped down his cheeks. It was no wonder he was so frightened. This was his residence, his study. It was the safest and most hidden place in his life. He was different from the other officials of Jiaoji. Most of them were outsiders. However, he was not. Chun Di was the imperial advisor of Jiaoji and also the magistrate of Shiyu City. After all, Shiyu City was his home ground. However, a stranger actually came in and out of this place that he thought was safe. His eyes were already used to the darkness. He saw a black shadow appear in front of him. There was no candlelight. This made the black shadow look even more sinister and mysterious. It was this feeling that made Lord Chun have goosebumps all over his body. It wasn't hard for him to imagine that if that person didn't want to talk to him, but wanted to make things difficult for him, or even kill him, then wouldn't he have already become a corpse that was gradually turning cold? Chindi was so nervous. He looked like a hedgehog, with spikes all over his body. It seemed like he would explode at any moment. The black shadow saw all of this. He chuckled. "Lord Chen, there's no need to make a fuss. I'm standing here talking to you in a friendly manner. I don't want to do anything to you. Isn't this already expressing my sincerity?" Sincerity, my A**S. At this moment, Chindi really wanted to curse in his heart. But in the end, he did not say it out loud. Just think about it. Since the other party is standing there, doesn't that mean that they have already thought about all kinds of reactions I will have? And if I were to scream now, what kind of consequences would it bring? Chun Di, who would never put himself in danger, forced himself to calm down. In order to ease his nervousness and the fear in his heart, he purposely used words to calm the other party down. "Who are you? Why would he appear here? Could it be that you're not afraid that if I casually shout, the guards in the mansion will kill you?" "No, no, no." Although he kept denying it, he was not nervous at all. The Black Shadow said, "Lord Chen is a smart man. Since he is smart, he will not seek death for no reason. Am I right?" Hiss! Chen Di sucked in a breath of cold air and sighed in his heart. "Sure enough, the other party already has the idea of killing me. Otherwise, he wouldn't make such a threat. If he wasn't prepared, he wouldn't be so relaxed." He lamented in his heart that he was still smart enough not to scream out loud. But at the same time, he had some guesses about the identity of the person who came. Someone would suddenly appear in front of him when the mansion was under siege. It seemed that he could guess who sent this person even if he used his toes to think. "You're a loyal man. Impressive. Lord Chun is indeed Lord Chun. You're also the smartest person in the Chun family. You guessed my identity so quickly. I wonder if you're interested in my arrival?" The Black Shadow chuckled. His tone was full of admiration. "That shouldn't be a problem, right? Who else could appear here at this moment other than you all? I'm just curious. This is my mansion. I've been running this place for many years. Those who can get close to this study are all people I trust. So why are you here? Do you mind telling me who's secretly helping you?" Chun Di seemed to be curious, but in fact, he was testing the Black Shadow. It seemed that he wanted to get the answer he wanted from the Black Shadow. "Ha ha!" Another chuckle was heard. The Black Shadow continued, "All right, Lord Chun, you're a smart person, but don't think that others are fools. Do you think that I would casually reveal such a secret? Of course, you can understand it as money makes the world go round. Some people seem sincere, but it's only because they don't have enough bargaining chips to betray you. After all, as long as you have money, there are very few people and things in this world that can be rejected. Don't you agree?" Chun Di was speechless. Indeed, in this world, although money wasn't everything, it was still very useful in some things. For example, if you bribed your subordinates, some people would still betray you even if you used money. After all, Jiaoji was considered a feudal dynasty. In such a dynasty, people were divided into classes. Since there were classes, there would be unfairness. Some people had more money and power, while others had less. For those who had very little, when a large sum of money appeared, how many people would be able to refuse it? Knowing that there was no point in dwelling on this matter, Chun Di adjusted his mood and said, "All right, I won't ask this question. But since you suddenly appeared here, and in such a manner, I'm sure you have something that you need my help with. If that's the case, you may speak. Of course, I still want to remind you that before you speak, it's best to assess the situation in front of you. If your request is too excessive, I only need to shout outside, and countless people will immediately rush in to take your life." Even at this time, Chun Di still didn't forget to threaten the other party. Or, rather, he wanted to take the initiative in this matter. It had to be said that he was indeed a smart person. At least he knew how to use his advantage to do things. Unfortunately, this time, Chun Di was facing the Security Bureau's External Affairs team leader, Yang. This person was highly valued by Deputy Director Yang Chendong. At the same time, Yang Chendong had met him many times in private and even instructed him to teach many things. He wouldn't take such a threat seriously at all. As a member of the Security Bureau, they had always believed in a maxim, that is, wealth comes from danger. Many times, in order to complete a task, not only did they need to do a lot of foreshadowing before doing it, but they also needed to risk their lives at the last moment, putting themselves in danger, going to the tiger's den, and so on. These were all necessary experiences. For these senior agents of the Security Bureau who had long disregarded life and death and only had tasks and missions in their eyes, they weren't even afraid of death. So why would they be afraid of Chundi's verbal threats? What's more, if Chundi really shouted here, the first one to die would be the one who shouted. Therefore, in the face of Chundi's obviously weak voice, Yunk continued to laugh and said, "No, I said before that Master Chun is a smart person. You won't do such meaningless things. The most important thing is that if you shout, you will lose your life first, right? And there's no point in doing so. If you die, perhaps many people will be secretly happy. It will even be a shame for the entire Chun family. After all, who knows if we're fighting among ourselves because of the unequal sharing?" After Yunk completely pointed out the matter, Chundi's face became very ugly. He suddenly realized that the other party was a devil. The other party had already thought of everything. Compared to him, who was suddenly faced with such a predicament, there were too many factors that he didn't consider. Just as Yunk said, Chundi might not be afraid of death and could even shout loudly to attract the servants in the mansion. But in this way, not only would he die, but he might also die in a very stupid way. If others really thought that he was colluding with a foreign country and died because of the unequal sharing, wouldn't it cause trouble for the entire Chun family? Chun family was the second largest surname in Jiaoji, second only to Yuan family. They were even stronger than the current Li family of the king. But unfortunately, 10 years ago, Chun Heijin had a disagreement with the family and announced his departure from the Chun family and had begun to decline. Although he still had some influence among the civil officials, and it couldn't even be considered small. But there wasn't a single person in the military who could make a move. If a family could only control some public opinion and didn't have an effective military to support them, one could imagine how many restrictions they would face when doing things. Take Chundi, for example. Although he had some ability, was quite smart, and had the position of a court official, he could only be confined to this small piece of land in Shiyu City. This was the disadvantage of not having military power. Without anyone to support him, his words carried less and less weight. The entire Chun family's status in society became lower and lower to the point that they were about to fall from being the second largest family. When that time came, there would be many people who would be willing to step on them. At that time, it would be the greatest test for the entire Chun family. Fortunately, a war suddenly broke out, and then the mercenaries came. After that, some of the actions against the Chun family disappeared. Of course, this didn't mean that those people had given up on the idea of sharing the benefits of the Chun family. Instead, when an even greater enemy appeared, everyone automatically ignored their threat and existence. Chapter 529. From a certain point of view, the appearance of the mercenaries had temporarily saved the Chun clan. At the very least, it gave them a chance to deal with the situation. Of course, if the mercenaries retreated, then it wouldn't be long before the Chun clan would still face heavy pressure and danger. It was precisely because she had understood all of this that Yunk had sought out Chundi instead of the other important ministers of Jiaoji. From their analysis, the Chun clan was the most likely to bow to the mercenaries. From a certain point of view, they had a common enemy, didn't they? Seeing that Chundi was speechless, Skylark smiled like a winner and said, "Well, Lord Chun, you don't have to think too much. To be honest, I'm here to save you. Don't you think so?" As soon as he said this, Chundi knew that the other party had investigated him thoroughly. Under such circumstances, there was no point in saying anything else. He sighed and said, "All right, then say what you want to say. Let's see if I can do it." Yunk knew that Chundi had come to the main topic. It's very simple. When we attack the city tomorrow, we need your help. Our Duke of Loyalty said that no matter how strong a castle is, it's still afraid of being breached from the inside. You should understand what I mean. Of course, if you do this, when the city is breached, the Chun clan's bloodline will be preserved. What do you think? Isn't this a fair deal? Yonk directly said that he needed him to cause trouble in the city. Chun-Di was already prepared for this. After all, if it wasn't for this point, Yonk wouldn't have taken the risk to appear in front of him at this time. However, he was dissatisfied that Yonk only said that the Chun clan's bloodline could be preserved and didn't say anything about settling them down. This was different from what he had expected. When one needed help, shouldn't one have to pay a great price? A simple sentence like this, asking him to betray Jiaoji for the Chun clan's survival, was clearly a little too low of a bargaining chip. Therefore, he continued to argue, "Isn't this a little unfair? I have to take such a huge risk, and even be cursed by the people of the world, and all I get in return is to stay alive. This, of course, you won't just be alive. You can also form an army of 10,000. Of course, this army can be led by your Chun family, but when something happens, you still have to listen to the mercenaries. Yes, this is already the greatest concession we can make. You should know that with the powerful firepower of the mercenaries, even if you don't do this, Shiyu City will still be destroyed. At that time, the Chun clan won't even be able to survive. This isn't something Lord Chun wants to see, right?" Chun-Di originally wanted to have a good talk, but when he heard about the powerful firepower of the mercenaries, his whole face turned ugly. Then he thought about how powerful the enemy they were facing this time was. Even if I don't contribute, it's only a matter of time before Shiyu City falls. When that time comes, will he blame himself for giving up the opportunity in front of him? Once his clansmen knew that there was a chance of survival in front of them, but he didn't fight for it, those people would definitely tear him apart. This was not a fair negotiation to begin with. Chun-Di had too few chips in his hands. In the face of Yun Kei's threats and temptations, he quickly surrendered and had no choice but to agree to the other party's request. As for whether this would be dangerous or not, what kind of joke was this? If the city fell, would he not be in danger? Not to mention, if Chun-Di didn't agree, he would probably die tonight. The night continued, but some people's mentality had already changed. After agreeing to Yun Kei's request, the two of them began to discuss the next day's battle. It was easy to imagine that with such a malignant tumor in the Jiaoji kingdom, which was already riddled with holes, the speed at which it fell apart would only become faster. The sky would eventually brighten when time slowly passed, and the Grand Supreme also hung up in the sky. A war that would destroy the kingdom was slowly unfolding. The weather today was good. The drizzle from before had long disappeared. The sun hung high in the sky, giving people a feeling of being roasted. It was as if it would make people sweat unknowingly. Of course, whether the sweat was really because of the hot weather or because of fear and nervousness depended on one's perspective. It was almost noon, but there was still no movement from the Jiaoji army in Shiyu City. This seemed to indicate their attitude. Yang Qindong, who was already mentally prepared, first ordered the army to start cooking. After lunch, when there was still 15 minutes to noon, the mercenaries started to move. They slowly approached the east gate tower of Shiyu City. About 3 li outside the east gate of Shiyu City, a huge dying temple made up of about 5,000 heads was standing there. This was left behind by the Jiaoji soldiers in yesterday's battle. They left behind 6,000 to 7,000 corpses. Among them, other than a few who were shot in the vitals and had their heads smashed, the rest of the dead soldiers' heads were collected and piled up into this capital. 5,000 heads piled up was already a very majestic sight. In addition, the materials were still very fresh. From time to time, fresh blood would flow out from the heads. From afar, it gave people a very terrifying feeling. This was Yang Qindong's psychological tactic. Furthermore, it was the Jiaoji man named Mo Tuo who tried to assassinate him. No matter what he did now, no one would be able to say anything about it. There was a saying, the greater good is on his side. Although the capital was terrifying, it was only a method to affect the morale of the enemy. In order to win on the battlefield, one had to rely on strong military strength. In this aspect, the mercenaries were naturally strong. Just like now, at the front of the troops outside the city was naturally the main force of the Lung Feng's 3rd Battalion. There were 4 battalions of 400 Lung Feng soldiers wielding the 95 style. To his left and right were 7 auxiliary battalions, 2,800 soldiers in camouflage uniforms without any military ranks held Type 81 rifles in their hands. They were like lions trying to catch a rabbit, ready to pounce at any moment. Behind the auxiliary battalions were 18,000 Jiaoji mercenaries. They were all wearing the Jiaoji army uniform. The only difference was that each of them had a white towel of the same color on their right arm. This was used to differentiate them from the Jiaoji soldiers in the city. Behind the Jiaoji mercenaries were the 7 auxiliary battalions. Each of them held a steel blade or a spear in their hands. Their movements were uniform. Their existence was to tie up the loose ends and prevent the Jiaoji mercenaries from betraying them. Although anyone with a discerning eye could see that Jiaoji was on the losing side, anything could happen before a conclusion was reached. One shouldn't have the intention to harm others, but one should always be wary of others. Behind the 3,000 temporary auxiliary soldiers, there were many figures in military green camouflage uniforms. There weren't many of them, only 100 or so. However, those who were familiar with the mercenaries knew that this was the core of the troop. In fact, this was also where Yang Chendong was at. Beside him, there was a platoon of Lung Feng soldiers, Wolf Fong Special Forces, Ghost Sniper Team, and the 1st and 2nd Guard Squads. The battle was about to begin, but Yang Chendong didn't look at the situation in front of him. Instead, he squatted down and stroked a few pieces of military green metal equipment, as if he was caressing a beautiful woman. If there were soldiers from later generations who could see this scene, they would definitely shout out, "This is a mortar!" That's right, it was a mortar. Yang Chendong thought for a long time last night. In the end, he rejected the idea of taking out the huge cannons from the warehouse. However, he didn't do nothing. He still took out a new weapon like the mortar for today's battle. Since he had the warehouse in his hands, wouldn't it be a waste if he didn't make good use of the things inside? Whether it was the Lung Feng soldiers, auxiliary soldiers, or even temporary auxiliary soldiers, it wasn't easy to nurture these future Lung Feng soldiers. If he had the ability to make them sacrifice less, he wouldn't be stingy with taking out more things. The mortar was what he prepared. The mortar was a type of curved smoothbore cannon with a short body, a large angle of fire, and a high trajectory arc. It was loaded from the muzzle and fired a projectile with a tail fin. It was loaded from the muzzle and fired in a curved manner. The cannon was short, had a short range, and was light and flexible. It could shoot targets behind cover. Since the invention of the mortar, it had always been an effective suppressive weapon to support and accompany infantry in combat. It was an extremely important conventional weapon for infantry, and Yang Chendong took out the 100 millimeters mortar used by the active Chinese regiments. The 100 millimeters mortar used by the active Chinese regiments was the caliber of the mortar. The total weight was about 100 kilograms. The maximum range was 8,000 meters, and the effective killing radius was about 20 meters. This type of mortar wasn't the largest caliber, nor was it the smallest. The weight of 200 kilograms wasn't too heavy. At least a few people could easily lift it up. Early in the morning, when the 5 mortars appeared in Yang Chendong's tent, only Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei were surprised. Fortunately, they had seen this kind of thing many times before. Since the young master didn't explain it to them, they naturally didn't ask anything. As for the others, when they saw that Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei didn't show the slightest surprise, they didn't ask. They all thought that this was originally arranged by the sixth young master. Yang Chendong could feel a trace of confusion in Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei's eyes, but he didn't explain. Didn't they all think of him as a god? Then he would continue to be one. In fact, he really didn't know how to explain anything. Chapter 530. It was getting closer and closer to noon. The east gate of the west side of the city was tightly shut. It was as though they would not budge no matter what happened. However, if one were to walk behind the east gate, one would see that there were many Jiaoji soldiers gathered there. Among them, there were elephant soldiers riding on elephants, black soldiers with darker skin than normal people, and the crown prince's soldiers and the king's guards. A total of 100,000 people were gathered outside the east gate. Due to the large number of people, the line was already 10 miles from the city center. This was the Jiaoji army's tactic. Once the battle started, they would use the human wave tactic to charge out. As long as they could reach the mercenaries, they would see the hope of victory. As for the 150,000 Jiaoji soldiers, 50,000 were left in the city to protect the trebuchets and maintain order in the city. The other 100,000 were at the north and south gates, waiting for the elite Jiaoji soldiers to charge out so that they could surround them from the sides. In short, they wanted to use their advantage in numbers to fight to the death with the mercenaries. Inside the east gate, 10,000 crown prince's soldiers were ready to charge at the front lines. Behind them were 10 moving metal chariots. Inside the chariots were some strong men who used their legs to help them move. In the eye sockets of the chariots, there were 20 crossbowmen who were ready to fire at any time. These were the defensive measures that the Jiaoji army had come up with in a short period of time to counter the fire of firearms. Whether it was the metal chariots or the metal shields, once they could block the bullets, the soldiers behind would have more chances to charge forward and engage in close combat. With this, the Jiaoji army had a chance of victory. The Jiaoji army had made their final preparations. The mercenaries outside the city were also checking their guns and ammunition for the last time. Compared to the nervous Jiaoji soldiers in the city, they were more excited. This was a battle that could wipe out a nation. The sixth young master was watching them from behind. Every soldier had a chance to perform. Everyone wanted to achieve merit in this battle and return to Qiqian City with their medals to receive the congratulations of their family and friends. However, there was one thing that puzzled Luo, the commander of the 2nd Cold Front Regiment. That was why the 6th young master didn't order them to attack the city. He only ordered them to guard the area to Li in front of the city gates and surround the area in a fan shape. Commander, what is the 6th young master's intention? Will they be able to charge out if we guard like this? 3rd Battalion Commander Kong Chuanxin came to Luopo's side and asked in confusion. Clearly, he was also confused about the formation. Of course, Luopo would not say that he did not know how the 6th young master arranged it. As a superior, he glared at Kong Chuanxin and said, "Return to your commanding position. Do you need me to say more about obeying orders?" Kong Chuanxin reluctantly returned to his position after being given the cold shoulder. He raised his head and looked at the sky. He seemed to be looking at the sun to see if it was noon. Just as he was about to do that, a few huge flames streaked across his pupils. He swore that the flames instantly attracted all his attention. His gaze moved instinctively, and he saw the flames falling in an arc into Shiyu City. Then a series of loud noises that made him feel stupefied, and the entire earth trembled. Boom, 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 boom. The power of the mortars was on full display at this moment, especially when those cannonballs fell into the predetermined coordinates. which was the east side of the city, the lethality and destructive power it brought was very shocking. The streets and alleys were filled with elite Jiaoji soldiers. They were waiting for the mercenaries to get close enough to open the city gates and charge out like a gust of wind. Although such an attack would inevitably result in some casualties who wouldn't die in a war. Moreover, the general had said that once they reached the side of the mercenaries, the scales of victory would tip in their favor. The general also said that no matter who it was, as long as they managed to snatch an advanced firearm from the mercenaries, they would be able to exchange it for 200 taels of silver. 200 taels of silver, compared to the Jiaoji soldiers who only received 2 taels of silver a month. That was equivalent to 10 years of their income. How could such a reward not excite them? Some of the more impatient ones couldn't resist the urge to open the city gates and charge out. The saying, "A man will die for wealth," was vividly displayed at this moment. This was also the reason why there were so many Jiaoji soldiers at the East Gate, yet there wasn't any chaos. There weren't any fights between soldiers either. Perhaps everyone's attention was focused outside the city, on the battlefield, thinking of ways to earn more money. Who would be willing to cause more trouble? It was precisely because these people were gathered together that when the mortar shells landed in the eastern part of the city, the destructive power and lethality caused by them was extremely shocking. Many of the soldiers didn't raise their heads to look, so they naturally didn't know where the cannonballs would land. Of course, even if they looked, they wouldn't know where the safest place was either. Based on the speed of sound, the whistling sound was heard first. Then, in less than a second, the cannonballs that were powerful enough to deafen and incinerate people landed on the ground, displaying their formidable might. Every time the cannonballs landed, the area within 30 meters around them would become the most dangerous zone. This was especially so when the cannonballs landed within a radius of 3 meters around them. A huge crater was formed. Regardless of who it was or what it was, they would instantly be reduced to charcoal. Then there was the area of 10 meters around them. Anyone who stood in this area would be instantly dismembered. Even their parents wouldn't be able to recognize them. Even at the outer perimeter, there were still many cannonball fragments flying about. Even if it was just one fragment, it would be enough to cause them to fall to the ground and cry out in pain. At the same time, they would completely lose their ability to fight. Their miserable cries would also greatly affect the morale of the surrounding soldiers. 5 mortar shells were fired from 5 different positions in a very short period of time. The lethality and destruction caused by the shells could no longer be described with words. For some of the Jiaoji soldiers, there was nothing to be afraid of, or rather, they didn't know what fear was. However, for those who were still alive, it was indeed a great shock. That kind of feeling could really be described as a living hell because they didn't know where that godlike thing would land next. Would it just happen to land on their heads? One had to know that this was a mortar taken out from Dacham. Even the shells were produced by Dacham. This made their accuracy and explosive power extremely high. These cannonballs were also developed by the modern army after countless efforts and experiments. They were meant to be used by the grassroots army and were extremely useful. The 25 cannonballs were equivalent to 25 godlike things. This had already scared the higher-ups of Jiaoji silly. King Li of Jiaoji was already dumbfounded. He didn't know what to say, nor did he know how to describe his current feelings. Perhaps if he had to say it, King Li would definitely curse him for not saying anything when he had such a powerful weapon, and only using it now. What was the point of fighting this war then? If the godlike thing was even more furious, perhaps there wouldn't even be a need to fight this war. Shiyu City would be bombed into ruins, and all of them would become fertilizer and be buried in this land forever. Father, what should we do? The crown prince, Li Yuanlong, was also enraged by the God of heaven and lost his temper. He looked at his father with eyes filled with endless fear and terror. Open the city gates and rush out. No matter what, we can't admit defeat like this. Also, think of a way to leave behind some of our elites. We will leave from the west gate and head to the commandant's city. King Lili had no choice but to prepare for the worst. Abandoning Shiyu City and heading to the commandant's city was a chess piece that Lili had prepared. He thought that this move wouldn't be necessary and would only be used after a period of time. However, it seemed like he had no choice but to use it in advance. Yes, Crown Prince Li Yuanlong calmed down a little after hearing his father's words and went to pass down the order. Outside Shiyu City, the mercenaries were also shocked by the power of the mortar. In fact, it wasn't the first time some of them had seen the power of a cannon. In fact, the power of a cannon was far greater than the power of a mortar. However, because they hadn't received any news previously, they were shocked by this sudden change. Look, the city gates are open. The Jiaoji soldiers are about to rush out. It was unknown which Lung Feng suddenly shouted, drawing everyone's attention to him. As the commander of the 2nd Regiment, Luo Po's ears were still buzzing. No matter what, the fact that he was able to take on the role of a regiment commander was enough to prove his high mental fortitude. Therefore, when he saw that the city gate was open from the inside, he began to shout loudly. At the same time, he also gave an order. Everyone, get ready. Our chance to shine is here. Check your guns and prepare grenades. Chapter 5:31. The order was passed down one by one. Soon, a main battalion of the Cold Vanguard Battalion and 7 auxiliary battalions raised their guns and aimed at the Jiaoji soldiers coming out of the city. It had to be said that elites were indeed elites. Regardless of whether it was the Crown Prince's guards holding shields or the King's guards moving out of the city, they did not panic as they exited the city. It was as though the cannon fire did not affect them too much. That was the truth. The cannon fire landed on the east side of the city. As the guards at the city gate, they were not affected much, but the sound of the explosion was slightly louder. They were not affected too much. So the moment they walked out of the city, they appeared to be in an orderly manner. In fact, there was even a dignified aura that was revealed. They want to use their shields and carts to defend against our firearms. The political commissar of the Cold Vanguard 2nd Battalion, Kong Jia, looked at the formation of the Jiaoji soldiers and said emotionally, "Humph, prepare to fire the rocket launchers." Commander Luo only glanced at them casually before making the necessary arrangements. He wanted the enemy to know how laughable their carts and shields were in front of mercenaries. Of course, this was only preparation for the worst. After all, rocket launchers could not be considered a conventional weapon due to the limited production capacity of Qiqian City's munitions factory. It would be best if they could use them sparingly. Let's get them to fire first and see what happens. Luo Pa did not immediately give the order to fire the rocket launchers. Instead, he gave the order to fire first. He wanted to see if the shields and carts could really defend against bullets. The Cold Vanguard Battalion and the auxiliary soldiers who had been itching to attack for a long time were waiting for their commander's order. After the order was given, a series of gunshots rang out. Bronze-colored bullet shells were scattered everywhere. The bullets that were shot out also hit the iron shields and iron carriages that came out first. The Jiaoji soldiers, who were well prepared in this aspect, performed well in the face of the bullets. Other than a few shield-wielding soldiers who accidentally exposed their heads, most of the Jiaoji soldiers were able to block this wave of attacks and did not suffer any damage. General Fan Yuhai, who was standing behind Iron Shield, was overjoyed when he saw the results of the battle. He took the opportunity to loudly encourage his soldiers. "Very good. Everyone should have seen it. Their guns are useless against us. Listen to my orders. Advance. Needless to say, the faces of the Jiaoji soldiers were filled with excitement. They were still worried that their shields wouldn't be able to withstand the seemingly omnipotent muskets, but after seeing that their shields were actually effective, the soldiers' morale was boosted, and following a loud yell, their footsteps seemed to have become a lot more relaxed. With these shield soldiers and metal chariots blocking the front, more and more Jiaoji elites charged out from the city. They moved forward slowly while preparing for a full-scale assault. The shields were made of pure pig iron, and their thickness of nearly 10 centimeters made them impervious to long-range bullets. However, at the same time, it also increased the weight of the shields, causing their movement speed to become extremely slow. Even so, they continued to work hard. At least they saw the hope of success. Sure enough, it can block bullets, Wang Yao said. 2nd Regiment Commander Luo looked at the scene in front of him and frowned slightly. However, he quickly relaxed. Regiment Commander, can we use the rocket launchers to blast them away? Political Commissar Kong Jia asked worriedly. There's no rush. Let's wait for more of them to come out. Political Commissar, didn't you see that the 6th young master's side had stopped firing? He. Luo Pu was very relaxed when he spoke of this. Clearly, everything that happened before his eyes was within his expectations. Political Commissar Kong Jia wanted to say something, but when he heard that even the 6th young master's side had stopped moving, he nodded in realization. It seemed like the 6th young master wanted to eliminate the main force of the Jiaoji army outside the city. If they used the rocket launchers now, it would only scare them away. Once they entered the city, it would be much more troublesome to start a street fight. After the regiment commander and political commissar understood everything, the mercenaries naturally quieted down. However, this silence was only the calm before the storm. The Jiaoji army naturally didn't know about this. Even the commanding general, one of the famous generals of Jiaoji, Fan Yuhai, didn't think too much about it. In his opinion, the mercenaries must be helpless against such a strategy. Next, it was time for him to show off his skills. As for why the so-called God's Fury didn't appear, it was very likely that the enemy had used up all their ammunition. One couldn't blame Fan Yuhai for thinking this way. Even though he was a famous general, when faced with unknown advanced firearms, his imagination was pitiful. The Jiaoji army was still accelerating their formation. They were continuously sending out large numbers of soldiers outside the city in preparation for the final battle. When this news was sent to the temporary palace in the city, King Li and Crown Prince Li Yuanlong couldn't help but sigh in relief. When the artillery shells landed and started to wreak havoc in the city, they really thought that the situation was over. Their hearts couldn't help but turn cold. However, the sudden change in the battlefield gave them new hope. Good. Inform General Fan and General Chen to do as they please. As long as we can defeat the mercenaries and take the advanced firearms in their hands, it will be worth it no matter what price we have to pay. He was afraid that the 2 generals at the front wouldn't be able to give it their all. At this moment, King Li gave them a lot of power. However, King Li didn't know. Perhaps he had placed all his attention on the battlefield in the east of the city. He didn't know that in the west of the city, there was a faction opposing him that was growing. The master behind this faction was the minister of the imperial court and the minister of the west of the city, Chun Di. Last night, he'd said that he'd come to an agreement with Yun, Quebec. No matter if it was for the sake of his own survival or for the sake of the Chun clan that stood behind him, he didn't have a path of retreat now. It was either death or destruction, so he would naturally choose the death of others. After Chun Di made his decision, the advantages he had gained from managing the west of the city for many years were finally revealed. After he gathered some of his trusted subordinates and Qin clan members, he raised the slogan of opposing King Li Li. He claimed that it was because of King Li Li's arrogance that he sent people to assassinate the Duke of Zhongdan of the great Ming dynasty, that the entire Jiaoji kingdom was in danger. If they wanted to resolve this matter and survive, there was only one way. That was to overthrow King Li Li and build a new kingdom in the Jiaoji region under the leadership of the mercenaries. In order to gain everyone's support and trust, Chen Di even told them that he had met with the mercenaries and that they had agreed to let him build an army of 10,000. There was no other way. Although most of the people were trustworthy, their opponent was King Li Li. Who knew if there would be a snitch? As expected, after Chen Di said that he had met with the mercenaries, the restless crowd quickly calmed down. As an opponent, the mercenaries were very terrifying. But once they became friends, this fear would no longer appear on them. Instead, it would become a great help, wouldn't it? Rather than saying that they trusted Chen Di, it was more accurate to say that they trusted the mercenaries. But no matter what the outcome was, these people had been successfully instigated to defect. The first thing they did was to target the catapults that were everywhere in the city. The catapults were one of the most advanced and commonly used long-range projectile weapons of that era. They were originally prepared to deal with the mercenaries that entered the city. When the huge rocks suddenly fell from the sky, although they would suffer losses, the mercenaries wouldn't be in a better situation. This thing was also what the City Security Bureau's Foreign Affairs Division, Skylark, and the others were afraid of. After receiving the 6th Young Master's order, they decided to remove this danger first. This also made Chen Di and the others valuable to be used. With these people's response and their subordinates, the 10,000 Jiaoji soldiers were quickly under their control. Then they charged towards the catapults in the city and began to destroy them. King Li Li didn't know about this. By the time he received this news, the situation had already been decided, and the losses could not be recovered. Outside the east side of the city, apart from Crown Prince Li Yuanlong, who had followed his father's orders and called back the 5,000 Crown Prince guards, the other 100,000 elites were quickly leaving the city and getting into formation. An army of nearly 100,000. If all of them were deployed, it would be a very large force. Just looking at it from afar would make one's legs go soft and their entire body tremble. After all, this scale was enough to make anyone who was advancing feel fear. Commander Luo Po also knew this and didn't want his soldiers to experience this. Although he had confidence in the mercenaries, especially in Long Feng, it was better not to try some things. Therefore, when the other side left the city with about 50,000 people, he waved his hand and ordered the 5 rocket launchers to each lead 5 deputies to move to the west of the city under the East City Gate. There was no other way. The effective range of the rocket launcher was only around 200 meters. Right now, the distance between the two sides was at least 500 meters. Although this distance was shrinking as the Jiaoji army continued to leave the city, he couldn't wait any longer. He could only order the rocket launchers to attack first. Chapter 532. A total of 30 people left the group and charged forward. This scene was witnessed by the commander of the Jiaoji army, General Fan Yuhai. Although he did not know what these people were doing, his instincts told him that they were up to no good. However, even though he knew this, he did not have any better ideas. After all, the movement speed of the Iron Shield soldiers was too slow. If he sent other people to charge forward, they would be met with countless musket fire. It was no different from seeking death. The only thing he could do now was to wait and see what the other side was going to do. Of course, if the other side really rushed to 100 meters away from him, then the crossbowmen in the iron carriage would be able to play their role. Those crossbows had been heavily modified and could shoot up to 130 meters away. Within this distance, they were the kings of existence. Obviously, the rocket launchers had a range of 200 meters, so they definitely wouldn't rush into the range of 130 meters. When the distance reached 180 meters, they took the initiative to stop. Then, they put the rocket launchers on their shoulders and prepared to fire the rocket launchers. What are they doing? Seeing this scene, the Jiaoji soldiers could not help but stop in their tracks. Even the Iron Shield soldiers and Iron Chariot soldiers did the same. Before figuring out the enemy's goal, no one would foolishly charge forward. Under everyone's gaze, the 5 soldiers with the rocket launchers launched their unique attack. Boom, 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 boom. 5 strong lights flashed, and in less than 2 seconds, they were accompanied by a series of loud rumbling sounds. In the front row of the Jiaoji army, the Iron Shield soldiers were engulfed by the powerful force of the rocket launchers and fell to the ground. Even 2 out of the 10 Iron Chariots were hit. The instantaneous high temperature and the aftermath of the explosion turned the Iron Chariots into fiery red chariots. The Jiaoji soldiers inside were turned into roasted ducks. No, seeing how powerful the rocket launcher was, Fan Yuhai, who was hiding behind the Iron Shield soldier, screamed in pain. As if to prove his cry, a series of gunshots were heard. The Jiaoji soldiers who were not protected by the Iron Shield soldiers became the targets of the mercenaries. As the bullets flew, the Jiaoji soldiers fell to the ground one after another. Boom, 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 boom. Another wave of rocket launchers was launched, and the shield-wielding soldiers were sent flying into the air. 2 more armored vehicles were hit and turned into scrap metal. More and more Jiaoji soldiers were exposed and became the targets of the mercenaries. Every moment, every breath, every second, the Jiaoji soldiers would lose their lives. The scales of victory on the battlefield seemed to be tilting in their favor. All troops attack. Fan Yuhai, who was protected by a group of personal guards, saw more and more soldiers being shot. He knew that if he continued to wait, the morale of the army would crumble and they would definitely lose the battle. Thus, he directly gave the order for the entire army to charge. Fortunately, there was only a distance of 500 meters between the 2 sides. As long as they were fast enough, there was still a chance for them to reach the mercenaries. If that was the case, the situation would very likely develop in their favor. Retreat. Seeing that the Jiaoji soldiers had launched their attack, the rocket launchers who originally wanted to continue the fight hurriedly retreated. They formed a group of 6. After countless rounds of training, the speed of their retreat was so fast that the pursuing Jiaoji soldiers could only look on in the dust. Furthermore, if they wanted to continue the pursuit, they would have to face the rain of bullets. Yes, it was a rain of bullets. If Yang Qindong knew that the Jiaoji army would send out a large number of soldiers, he would have prepared 9 squad machine guns for the 3rd Battalion of Lungfeng. On average, each squad would have 1 machine gun. He also prepared 3 rounds of bullets in order to prevent the Jiaoji soldiers from suddenly charging forward. As such, the soldiers of the Jiaoji army surged forward like a tidal wave, and what welcomed them was a torrent of bullets. When the squad machine guns fired at a rate of nearly 1,000 bullets per minute, the charging Jiaoji soldiers fell to the ground in droves. This attack greatly suppressed the momentum of the Jiaoji soldiers charging forward. No one was unafraid of death. So what if they were elite soldiers? With the help of the squad machine guns, the charging momentum of the Jiaoji soldiers was greatly suppressed. This caused the 2 generals, Fan Yuhai and Chun Heijin, to have a pained expression. Chun Heijin's eyes were filled with tears when he saw his elite black soldiers charge forward crazily and fall to the ground one by one, unable to stand up again. These black soldiers were the elites that he had accumulated over many years in the army. With them, he was able to achieve what he wanted. It was only because of them that the Jiaoji army dared to go against the southern Ming Empire and even interfere with their internal affairs. But now, under such a large number of deaths, how could Chen Heijin, as a general, not feel heartache? Get me an elephant. I want to go into battle personally. He could not watch the deaths in his hands. More importantly, he could not even get within 200 meters of the enemy. At this moment, Chen Heijin was furious. Not only that, he even made the decision to go into battle personally. General. Naturally, some of Chen Heijin's personal guards wanted to stop him. However, Chen Heijin, who was in a killing frenzy, would not listen to his subordinates' advice. He shook his head and walked towards an elephant. 20,000 war elephants. This was the strongest force that the Jiaoji army had. It was also the only chance of victory. After all, elephants had thick skin and flesh. Perhaps they were the only ones that could ignore the bullets and charge into the mercenary camp. Chen Heijin climbed onto the back of the elephant. He had already placed a chain around it to ensure that it would not fall off if it moved. Then he waved the long sword in his hand and shouted the word kill. Chen Heijin led 20,000 elephant soldiers and tens of thousands of black soldiers in a suicidal charge. Thump, 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 thump. The heavy elephant body stomped on the ground, bringing with it a series of rumbling sounds. When the 20,000 elephants attacked from the front and back, the momentum was terrifying. On the side of the mercenaries, the 18,000 Jiaoji mercenaries were shocked. As a former member of the Jiaoji people, they knew a thing or two about these war elephants. Some of them even knew that the elephant army played a decisive role in the battle against the great Ming dynasty's musketeers. Now, could the musketeers of the mercenaries stop the elephants from getting closer? If they could not, once these war elephants charged into the camp, they would start wreaking havoc. Once the rest of the Jiaoji army charged in, would they still be able to win? It was no wonder that the Jiaoji mercenaries were so afraid. After all, the mindset of first sight is the most important thing could affect a person. While they were worried, the remaining 6 iron chariots of the Jiaoji army started to move forward. The thousands of Iron Shield soldiers who had regrouped were moving behind the elephant army. They looked like they were going to take advantage of the situation and charge forward. This was the real attack. The Jiaoji army was unleashing their last bit of potential. It was not an exaggeration to say that if they could withstand this wave, the Jiaoji army would not be able to fight anymore. On the other hand, if they could not withstand this wave, the mercenaries would be completely defeated. Don't be afraid of wasting bullets. Fire as hard as you can. Grenade squad, concentrate all the grenades. When they get close, blast them. The 2nd Regiment commander of the Cold Front, Luo Pe, shouted. At the same time, he ordered the 5 rocket launchers to prepare for attack. Battalion commander, shouldn't we stop for a while? The machine guns used by our 9 squads are all red. If this continues, I'm afraid they will be scrapped. Company Commander Tian Su came to Battalion Commander Kong Chuanshin's side and said anxiously, the squad machine guns were their treasures. They could not waste them after just one use. That would be the biggest waste. Battalion Commander Kong Chuanshin only hesitated for a moment before nodding. All right, since that is the case, let's rest the machine guns first. Everyone switch to the 9-5, continuous fire style. At the same time, be prepared to retreat. Kong Chuanshin hesitated for a while before saying the last sentence. This battle was indeed enjoyable. However, the Jiaoji elites were elites after all. Their fearless charging style had truly frightened them. The distance between them and the Jiaoji elites was getting closer and closer. Once they got close, no matter how good they were at fighting, they would not be able to gain the upper hand in a chaotic one-on-one battle. Furthermore, the The cold vanguard was a treasure. If the cold vanguard suffered heavy losses because of this, he wouldn't know how to answer to the others. If that really happened, his position as a battalion commander would come to an end. Company Commander Tian, Su hesitated for a moment when he heard Battalion Commander Tian say to be prepared to retreat. However, he quickly understood. Retreating did not mean admitting defeat. It was just a strategy, just like what the sixth young master said. Only by preserving one's strength would one be able to effectively defeat the enemy. If one died, then what was the point of fighting? Company Commander Tian, Su went to pass on the order. Kong Chuanxin held the 9.5 style in his hand and fired a dozen more bullets. At least a few Jiaoji soldiers died under his gun. Even a charging Jiaoji war elephant had more than one bullet embedded in its right front leg. It fell to one knee with a loud thud. While the Jiaoji soldier on it was flung away, it also brought a lot of resistance to the charging elephants behind it. However, only a small number of elephants fell to the ground. It was not enough to stop the charging momentum of the main force of the Jiaoji army. In front of the silver-armored war elephants, the power of the bullets was indeed weakened by a lot. Especially after the number of war elephants reached tens of thousands, the pressure on the mercenaries who only had a little more than 3,000 soldiers with firearms obviously increased. Chapter 533. The rocket launchers were fired, and the war elephants that were hit either fell to the ground or ran away in fear. It did alleviate some of the pressure on the main force of the mercenaries, but it still didn't have much effect on the overall situation. In the rear, Tiger's Mane put down the binoculars in his hand and said to Yang Qindong worriedly, "Young master, the soldiers in front are under a lot of pressure." Yes, they are under a lot of pressure. But when there is pressure, there is motivation, so that these boys don't have their noses up in the sky every day. They look like they are the boss, the second boss, and the third boss. Yang Qindong said this with a smile. Seeing that the young master could still talk and laugh here, Tiger's Mane couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. It seemed that the young master had a way to turn the situation around. Okay. Sure enough, when he saw that the war elephants were less than 150 meters away from the cold front, Yang Qindong finally stopped joking. Instead, he said to the first and second guards who were still standing in front of the 5 mortars, "Prepare to fire. Adjust the distance to 50 meters behind the war elephants." Although when the distance was close, the mercenaries still had a wave of grenades in their hands to attack. But if the opponent was only a few hundred war elephants, they could give it a try, but against 20,000, it was a bit insufficient. And if the war elephants really rushed into the mercenaries' team, the consequences would be unimaginable, and it was not something that Yang Qindong wanted to see. The first and second guards, who had been waiting anxiously, immediately began to operate the mortars. They even had a competition to see who could hit more accurately. In this regard, Yang Qindong naturally crossed his arms and watched the battle from the side. He had already taught the key points of operation to them, and it turned out that these team members also learned very quickly, which made him very relieved. The result of his relief was that when the mortar shells were fired again, they landed on the spot that Yang Qindong pointed out, and then fell into the elephant herd, sending countless elephants flying. The powerful shells were not comparable to rocket launchers, and the direct result was that the elephant herd was in chaos. After all, they were animals, not humans, although they had all been trained. Under the stimulation of the thunderous sound and the fiery light, these war elephants revealed their instincts and began to run in all directions. This caused the Jiaoji soldiers near them to suffer, and they became meat paste under the feet of the war elephants. Even the Jiaoji soldiers riding on the war elephants didn't fare any better. Faced with the disobedient war elephants, they were either thrown away or directly killed by the shells. Chun Heijin, one of the famous generals of Jiaoji, was unfortunately hit by a shell under such circumstances, and it happened to be in the center of the battlefield. His entire body instantly turned into countless pieces, and his original appearance could no longer be seen. There was a saying that success and failure depended on the same person. The hope that they had placed their hopes on had now become the biggest threat. The moment the Jiaoji soldiers were mercilessly trampled, it was already announced that the attack had failed. In addition, the mercenaries took this opportunity to launch a frenzied counterattack. Some of the brave soldiers directly rushed out and threw the grenades in their hands forward, causing balls of fire to appear. And then there was no more and then. The morale of the Jiaoji soldiers had been completely extinguished. Even one of the famous generals, Fan Yuhai, saw that the situation was turning for the worse and led 20,000 elite soldiers to escape in another direction outside the city. As for the soldiers who did not follow General Fan, what they needed to do now was to escape back to Shiyu City. It seemed that this was the only way to ensure their safety. However, at a time like this, where could there be a safe place? It was the same in Shiyu City. After Chun Di led his subordinates and the Chun clansmen to destroy all the catapults in the city, they didn't face the attack of the Jiaoji army. Instead, they were ignored and ignored. After the news of the defeat at the front lines had spread, even King Li and Crown Prince Li Yuanlong had escaped Shiyu City under the protection of the Crown Prince's 5,000 guards and were heading towards the commandery city. The king and Crown Prince had escaped, and so had General Fan. General Chun had died in battle, and the soldiers below him were like headless flies. Who would care about what Chun Di was doing? Especially the 100,000 Jiaoji soldiers who were waiting at the north and south of the city. They were like abandoned children, and no one cared about them. According to the original plan, when the 100,000 elite Jiaoji soldiers charged from the east of the city, the 100,000 soldiers of the Jiaoji soldiers would charge out from the north and south gates and cooperate with the main force to attack the mercenaries' camp. After all, they had the advantage in numbers. However, the moment the mortars were fired, the ordinary Jiaoji soldiers were afraid. They didn't want to face death, especially when they knew that in the original plan, they were just scapegoats and shields. It was normal for them to hesitate for a while. It was the hesitation of the generals that caused the soldiers below to react. When the order was given to open the city gates and charge at the mercenaries, they didn't want to do it. It wasn't a collective strike, but at least most of the people with brains stood in place and didn't move. When the generals saw that the soldiers didn't follow their orders, although they were angry, they didn't dare to do anything overboard. Who knew if the soldiers would attack them if they were forced into a corner? It was at this time that news came from the front lines. The main elite force had been defeated, the king and the crown prince had fled, and the catapults that had been placed all over the city in preparation for street battles had been destroyed by Chun Di, Magistrate Chun. It was also said that Magistrate Chun had joined the mercenaries and obtained a certain amount of authority. With so much news spreading, the 100,000 ordinary Jiaoji generals were confused. They had been abandoned and couldn't find a way forward. However, some of the smarter ones sent people to contact Chun Di. They wanted to see if there were any benefits to be gained from joining the mercenaries. It wasn't that these generals didn't have a code of brotherhood, but under the circumstances, this was the best choice. One had to know that the puppet army wasn't just a product of one country. As such, the entire Shiyu city began to fall into internal strife with different thoughts. This chaotic situation lasted for a total of 5 days. During these 5 days, the mercenaries stood guard outside the east gate, showing no intention of entering the city. According to Yang Qindong's words, it was a mess. If they entered now, it would be troublesome. There might even be some unnecessary deaths. He didn't want to see such worthless sacrifices. The mercenaries were all treasures, and even the auxiliary soldiers were future treasures. He didn't want to see any of them die, just because they went to clean up a mess that they had already won. Thus, the best way was to wait. He would wait for Chindi and Yunk to clear up the order in the city before entering. Of course, he didn't do anything during these 5 days. There were close to 50,000 captives outside the East Gate under his command. These were the elites of Jiaoji. Furthermore, they were made up of strong men and adult men. They were a rich source of manpower. With close to 50,000 captives, the 18,000 Jiaoji mercenaries were naturally put to good use. They were in charge of guarding the captives, while the auxiliary soldiers were in charge of screening and registration. The mercenaries and auxiliary soldiers were in charge of guarding the captives. The cooperation went smoothly. However, Yang Qindong was dissatisfied that 20,000 captives had escaped. Even the famous general of Jiaoji, Fan Yuhai, had escaped. Thus, the battle outside the East Gate had only killed 30,000 people. However, this was already enough to set the foundation for Jiaoji's downfall. This was because good news had just come from the commandery city. King Li and Crown Prince Li Yuanlong, who had escaped there, had already snuck into the commandery city. They had been captured alive by Wu Sheng, the commander of the 2nd Battalion of the Cold Front 2nd Regiment. Wu Sheng had led the 1st Battalion of the main force and 2 auxiliary battalions to fight in the Langsun region. At the peak of the battle, they had faced Qin Heijin's 30,000 black soldiers and Wan Gengwang's 30,000 Jiaoji soldiers. Even so, Wu Sheng and his men weren't at a disadvantage. Relying on their training in the rainforest, superior equipment, and close cooperation, they had killed 20,000 enemies and lost less than 200 men. After seeing Qin Heijin retreat to Shiyu City, the remaining 1,000 men had followed orders to the commandery city. They had quietly infiltrated the city and occupied it without leaving a trace. Only when King Li and his men were surrounded did they know that there was no way out. After a series of battles, General Ruan Xiaozhong had been killed, and King Li and Crown Prince Li Yuanlong had been captured. This also marked the fall of the Jiaoji kingdom. Just a few days ago, Chen Bo, the commander of the 2nd Battalion, who had defeated 100,000 Lancang soldiers and occupied Yinglu City, had returned. Along with him were 90,000 Lancang soldiers. Suddenly, the number of captives had reached 150,000, and the pressure was not small. Fortunately, there were 45,000 young and knowledgeable people from Hanoi City, the capital of Jiaoji Nation. Their arrival alleviated the pressure on the captives. They only needed to wait for 2 more days for the Niatong regiment to take over the captives, and the situation would be settled. From the time they entered Jiaoji until now, it had only been a month. Counting from the time they entered the Langsun region, it had only been 50 days. The arrogant Jiaoji army that dared to challenge the great Ming at its peak had been wiped out. Now, other than a few cities that were still guarded by Jiaoji soldiers, most of the main cities had been taken over by the mercenaries. It could be said that from this moment onwards, Yang Qindong could announce to the world that Jiaoji had been destroyed. 5 days later, Shiyu City was no longer as chaotic as before. After Chen Di asked for instructions and Yun Ke passed the message, the East City Gate was opened once more, and a large number of Jiaoji soldiers walked out. Chapter 534. Just this number alone amounted to about 100,000. All in all, there were a total of 250,000 adult male captives. Once they were sent to Qiqian City, it would greatly reduce the manpower pressure there. Yang Qindong could finally breathe a sigh of relief. 3 days later, Commander Niatong of the Navy led 10,000 men to Shiyu City and began to take over the 250,000 captives. they would be sent out of Jiaoji to Qiqian City in 3 batches. The overall situation was set. Another 3 days later, the envoy from Jiaoji to southern Ming and the imperial eunuch Kai Gu finally appeared outside Shiyu City. Speaking of which, it was quite tragic. Along the way from Nanjing, they had encountered all sorts of problems. For example, they had encountered horse bandits 5 times and were besieged by disaster victims. Although their lives were not in danger in the end, it had greatly hindered their progress. As such, they had only just arrived outside Shiyu City when they realized that the main army of Jiaoji had been annihilated. Not only that, even the king and crown prince of Jiaoji had been captured alive. They were unable to accept this outcome. They had said that they were here to announce the imperial edict for the Duke of Loyalty to withdraw from Jiaoji, but now it seemed that they had been dreaming. When Yang Chendong received news of the arrival of Zhu Qizhen's envoy, he was waiting in the temporary palace of Shiyu City to meet with Li Li and Li Yuanlong. Thus, when he heard Tiger's Mane's report, he casually said, "Arrange for them to stay in an inn in the city first. It won't be too late to meet them after I'm done with the matters here." This was not Yang Chendong being arrogant. Now that someone had come to beg them, wouldn't they be looked down upon if they did not act appropriately? Tiger's Mane nodded and retreated to handle the matter. At this moment, King Li Li and Crown Prince Li Yuanlong had already been escorted in under the supervision of a few members of the First Guard. Along with them was the commander of the 2nd Battalion of the Lungfeng Regiment, Wu Sheng. Wu Sheng could be considered to have started following Yang Chendong rather early. He had been by Yang Chendong's side ever since they were in the Yang residence in northern Ming's capital. Although they were both battalion commanders, there was still a difference in their relationship. This Wu Sheng belonged to the category that was closer to the 6th young master. For example, although in terms of official position, he was not as high as 2nd Regiment Commander Luopa, but in terms of personal friendship, there were some things that Luopa could not casually say, but Wu Sheng could. "Thank you for your hard work," Yang Chendong said with a smile when he saw Wu Sheng, who was wearing a camouflage uniform and had the insignia of a major. "Not at all." A silly smile appeared on Wu Sheng's face, but it quickly turned into a serious expression. The 6th young master could joke with him, but he did not have the right to joke with the 6th young master. Especially as the Yang clan system continued to grow, the distance between the two would only grow further and further. Yang Chendong was very satisfied with Wu Sheng's performance. He liked people who knew their limits when doing things, and only such people could be trusted. Those who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth when they came to power obviously would not have much of a future. When his gaze shifted from Wu Sheng to Li Li and Li Yuanlong, Yang Chendong could not help but chuckle. Yang Chendong did not know what King Li Li had been like in the past. However, Yang Chendong had personally seen what Crown Prince Li Yuanlong was like, but now, in comparison, he was no longer as high-spirited as he was that day. His hair was hanging upside down, falling messily on his face. Although his clothes still looked like high-end goods, they were wrinkled, especially with a few shoe prints on them. With one look, one could imagine what kind of treatment he had received. It could be said that, at this moment, there was no trace of the Crown Prince's demeanor on Li Yuanlong. It was not strange for people who did not know him to treat him as a beggar. Yang Chendong chuckled emotionally, but in the ears of Li Li and Li Yuanlong, the father and son pair, it was indeed a great mockery. The two immediately widened their eyes and looked like they couldn't wait to eat Yang Chendong. "Bastard, kneel down when you see the Duke of Loyalty." Beta Persei, who had been standing next to Yang Chendong, happened to see the unfriendly look in the eyes of the father and son and immediately roared. It was appropriate to say that it was a roar. Beta Persei's voice was very loud, and now that he was angry, his chi came out from his dantian. It was no different from a beast's howl. Just this shout scared Li Li and Li Yuanlong so much that they knelt on the ground. Of course, this was also due to the efforts of the members of the first guard squad behind them. In the eyes of the first guard squad, Beta Persei and Tiger's mane often represented the sixth young master. The one who was hurt the most by this roar was Yang Chendong, who was sitting in front of him. Fortunately, the qi that had appeared in his body at some unknown time had greatly protected him. That was why he was only startled and not injured. But he could not help but rub his ears first, then turned back to glare at Beta Persei until he saw the other party smile, a little embarrassedly. Then he turned his head again and looked at Li Li and Li Yuanlong. When the father and son glared at him just now, Yang Chendong didn't detect any killing intent from them. This could only prove that the two of them were really afraid. They just wanted to puff themselves up at their own cost. They just wanted to prove their existence and status. To be more specific, it was a bit of a show of strength, but cowardice at heart. Unfortunately, Yang Chendong did not care about such little tricks. Not to mention that they were already prisoners. Even if they still had their original identities, he would never be afraid. Li Yuanlong, do you still remember our conversation that night? Yang Chendong finally spoke after looking at the father and son with a scrutinizing gaze. Yes, I remember. Li Yuanlong seemed to suddenly think of something. Then a trace of confusion appeared in his eyes, and then his whole body could not help but tremble. That night, Yang Chendong once said to him that if the father and son were willing to take the initiative to surrender, although they would lose their power, they would still be safe for the rest of their lives. But if they did not surrender, then they could only choose death. At that time, these conditions were indeed difficult to accept in his ears. But now, the overall situation was set, and they had really become Yang Chendong's prisoners. How could they not be afraid when they thought of this matter? As if to prove what he said at the beginning, Yang Chendong suddenly swung his long arm, and two flashing golden throwing knives flew out, then landed at the feet of Li Li and Li Yuanlong. The position was only a fist away from their feet. Their eyes lit up. Other than the father and son, the other people in the hall looked at Yang Chendong with eyes full of admiration. Not for anything else, but just because of the beautiful throwing knife skill. This was something they could not do even if they were beaten to death. They could throw the throwing knife, but they would not throw it so far, a distance of 40 meters, and they would not throw it so accurately. Of course, if they knew that the person involved was not satisfied with this skill. Yang Chendong was still thinking in his heart that he was still not mature and skilled in using qi. He originally aimed at the feet of the other party. Thinking about it, if the two throwing knives landed less than an inch in front of the feet, what kind of situation would it be? In this way, Yang Chendong thought that he still had to work hard to cultivate. He believed that with the existence of qi, as long as he continued to work hard, he would be able to do whatever he wanted. Ignoring the admiring eyes of others, Yang Chendong looked at Li Li and Li Yuanlong, the father and son, and said in an emotionless voice, "Since you are the first country I destroyed, I will give you a chance. Only one of you can live, you can choose." What was cruel? Presumably, this was cruel. Only one of the father and son could live, or let them choose for themselves. Most likely, anyone would hesitate when faced with such a question. They would be conflicted, and they might even be unable to stop themselves from cursing. Fortunately, Li Li and Li Yuanlong were not ordinary people. One of them was the king of a country. The other was the crown prince of a country, the future king. How could they be measured by the standards of ordinary people? Just like now, the two of them only hesitated for a moment before reaching out and taking a throwing knife each. Li was already more than 60 years old. After experiencing this kind of torment, his face looked very old. So when he took the throwing knife, he shook his head, then put the throwing knife on the ground, and began to cry. Woo woo woo. It was hard to imagine what kind of feeling a 60-year-old man would give when he cried. It was hard to describe, but a sense of sadness involuntarily spread out. Long, I've let you down. I wasn't able to leave you a good family business. Now that I'm over 60 years old, I've lived long enough. Come, kill me. This way, you can live for a few more years. I just hope that every year on this day, you won't forget to burn some joss paper for me. Li was like a child who realized that he had lost his way. At this moment, Li completely opened his heart and cried bitterly. Originally, he had already clenched the throwing knife in his hand and was ready to fight to the death with his father, but he did not expect to see this scene. At this moment, Li Yuanlong did not know what to do. He only hesitated for a moment, then called out loudly and hugged his father. Although in his heart, he hated his father for provoking such a strong enemy like the mercenaries, causing him to lose his hope of succeeding the throne. But no matter what, this was his father, right? Now, he was willing to die to help him live just by giving him a hug. No matter how he looked at it, it was only right. Chapter 5:35. For a moment, the father and son hugged each other and cried bitterly. Everyone was confused by this scene. It should be noted that not only were Yang Qindong and the others in the hall, but also Hong Jin and Chen Di, who seemed to have surrendered to the mercenaries, as well as Prime Minister Wan Chuncheng and the others. They were all watching from the side. When they saw that Yang Qindong only gave the father and son the choice to live, they couldn't help but lower their heads. As former officials, of course, they didn't want to see this scene happen, but now the initiative was not in their hands. So, what if they couldn't bear it? What followed was another scene of a father-son relationship, which really moved everyone to tears. Even Wan Chuncheng was considering whether to stand up and plead for leniency. Although this may be useless and would anger the loyal duke of the great Ming dynasty, if he didn't do this, he would feel guilty. Just when Prime Minister Wan Chuncheng was still thinking about how to speak, the scene suddenly changed. A flying dagger suddenly appeared between the two people who were still hugging each other. Then, blood splattered. The two people separated immediately after the dagger touched each other. The sudden change of scene made many people unable to figure out what happened. It wasn't until they saw the young Li Yuanlong with a throwing knife in his chest that everyone was surprised and suddenly realized that Li had made his move. Yes, Li made a move. Just when his son was crying out of gratitude, he took the knife from his son's hand out of kindness and looked like he was going to commit suicide. It seemed that he was helping his son to make a decision. After all, patricide was a big crime. However, no one expected that the flying knife would turn around and stab the unsuspecting Li Yuanlong in the chest. Then, the two separated. The flying dagger pierced his chest where his heart was. Blood spurted out and landed on Lily's old face. It made him look even more terrifying and frightening. "Father, why?" With both hands covering his bleeding chest, Li Yuanlong's face was puzzled and full of disbelief. He stared fiercely at his father, Li, as if he wanted an answer. Unfortunately, Li didn't say anything. He was an ambitious and ruthless person and could be considered half an outstanding person. Anyone like him was extremely thick-skinned. But at this moment, he really didn't know what to say because everything was his fault. In order to survive, he didn't hesitate to use his son's life as a stepping stone. With so many people looking at him, he probably wouldn't have the face to see anyone in the future. But even though he knew there would be such a consequence, he still couldn't help but make the first move. Moreover, he had used such underhanded methods. Everything was because he didn't want to die. He was afraid of death. Don't think that some people are overbearing and act high and mighty. Usually, he would kill people without batting an eyelid and take their lives as if it were child's play. But usually, such people were very afraid of death. This was because they didn't know what they would face after death. That feeling of the unknown terrified them, especially after they were used to controlling everything. Death was their taboo. In particular, the older they got, the more fearful and fearful they felt. This was why many kings were very wise when they were young, but when they were old, they would study things like longevity. They knew it was impossible, but they had to do it. Li didn't want to die, so the one to die was Li Yuanlong. So what if this person was his son? At least he survived, right? As for whether his actions would cause others to hate him, he didn't care. In his opinion, since Yang Qindong had set the rules, as long as they followed the rules, it would be fine. As for the result, Yang Qindong would definitely admit it. Otherwise, it would be a slap in the face in front of everyone. Those who truly wanted to do great things wouldn't do such a thing. Li Yuanlong glared at his father with unwillingness. In the end, because he had lost too much blood, he fell to the ground with a plop and died with his eyes closed. Seeing all of this, the people at the side, including Wan Chuncheng, had a trace of hatred and confusion in their eyes. They suddenly looked down on their former king. On the other hand, Yang Qindong was just as Li had expected. He wasn't surprised at all. In fact, before Li was about to act, he had already felt it. Yes, he had indeed felt it. All of this was due to the qi in his body. It was that qi that told him that Li had killing intent, but Li Yuanlong didn't, so the result was already within his expectations. In fact, for Yang Qindong, he didn't care who lived or died. Just as Li thought, it was fine as long as they played within the rules of his game. Of course, he was more or less shocked that Li Yuanlong had personally killed his son. Perhaps this was the nature of an ambitious and ruthless person. Very good. Li, you win. From now on, no one will make things difficult for you. You can still live well. Of course, don't think about power and freedom. You will be sent to a very safe place. You won't have to worry about food and drink. If your former subordinates want to see you, they will be able to do so after they apply for permission. I only want to remind you of one thing. Don't think about unrealistic problems. Otherwise, no son will be willing to take the blame for you next time. After giving a definition to this matter and setting a rule for Li's life, Yang Qindong waved his hand. Then Ba Daojiang, Peng Yu, and a few other guards came forward to take Li away. Li Yuanlong's corpse was also taken away. After dealing with the Li father and son, Yang Qindong's gaze fell on Hong Jin, Chen Di, and Wan Chuncheng. Hong Jin, listen to my orders. Yes, sir. Hong Jin knelt on the ground with a plop, looking very pious. I appoint Hong Jin as the general of the Jiaoji mercenary army. He will command 15,000 soldiers. Chen Di, listen to my orders. You will be the deputy general of the Jiaoji mercenary army. You will command 10,000 soldiers. Wan Chuncheng, listen to my orders. You will be the deputy general of the Jiaoji mercenary army. You will command 5,000 soldiers. As soon as he opened his mouth, he appointed 3 people. As the first 2 people, Hong Jin and Chen Di, were naturally excited and happy. At least they would be able to live and have a certain amount of power. Compared to many of the ministers of Jiaoji, their outcome was the best. However, the last person to be named, Wan Chuncheng, stood there without moving for a long time after hearing Yang Qindong call his name. What? You're not willing? Seeing that Wan Chuncheng didn't say anything, Yang Qindong raised his voice as if he was questioning Wan Chuncheng. I don't have to die. Why would you forgive me and give me such an important task? Yuan Chuncheng was confused. Obviously, he did not understand Yang Chendong's decision. He had originally thought that he was going to die for sure, and he had even mentally prepared himself for it. However, who would have thought that not only was he innocent, but he was also given great power? Because you have the ability. I'm interested in your ability. There are still some places in Jiaoji that are in chaos. I hope that you can step in and calm them down so that fewer people die. I think you can do it, and you're willing to do it, right? Yang Chendong pointed out the reason why he wanted to put Yuan Chuncheng in an important position. Although Yuan Chuncheng did not contribute much, he did not do anything wrong either. It was his original identity that forced him to go against the Jiaoji mercenary army. There was no personal grudge between them. Furthermore, he was able to become the prime minister of Jiaoji. Even a formidable person like Lily approved of him. No one would believe that he did not have the ability. If he dared to put Lily in an important position, why wouldn't Yang Chendong do the same? Not to mention, Hong Jin and Chen Di were suppressing him from above, so there wouldn't be any problems. Of course, the main reason why Yang Chendong wanted to use Yuan Chuncheng was because he knew that Yuan Chuncheng was talented and capable. In the past, Jiaoji was his enemy. When he wanted to kill and destroy, he would not show any mercy. But now, this place had become his sphere of influence. Naturally, he had to change his mindset. How to quickly settle down and prosper here, and then use this place to influence other places and expand the influence and strength of the mercenary army was the most important thing. To achieve this, Hong Jin and Chen Di were not enough. On the other hand, Yuan Chuncheng could do it as long as he worked hard. Yuan Chuncheng could not immediately see through Yang Chendong's intentions, but he was still impressed by his magnanimity. Since ancient times, there was a saying that a gentleman would die for his bosom friend. Even if he did not care about this favor, he had to accept this task for the sake of the Yuan clan's descendants. Otherwise, if he angered Yang Chendong, not only would he die, but the Yuan clan would also suffer. Thud. Yuan Chuncheng knelt on the ground. He did it willingly. Thank you, Duke of Loyalty. Chuncheng will do my best. Only death awaits. Good, get up. I don't want you to die. Speaking of which, if you become my subordinate, you should live a better life. I have the ability to give you that. Of course, if anyone still has other tricks up their sleeves, don't blame me for being merciless once it's discovered. Yang Chendong's face couldn't help but become serious when he said the last part. I hate it when people betray me. If anyone dares to do so, they will suffer a fate worse than death. We don't dare, Hong Jin, Chen Di, and Yuan Chuncheng said in unison. Taking advantage of this situation, Yang Chendong nodded his head and handed the matter of pacifying the other parts of Jiaoji to the three of them. Presumably, with these 30,000 men and the influence of the mercenaries, there shouldn't be any resistance in Jiaoji. Chapter 536. As the three of them left, another young man was brought into the hall. As soon as the young man entered the hall, he knelt down in front of Yang Chendong and greeted him. The person who came was none other than one of the first students of the Yang Chendong Academy. He was also one of Yang Chendong's disciples, Chang Qianhao. The Chang family was a wealthy family. Not only was their family wealthy, but their businesses were spread all over the Jiangnan area. There were also some officials in the family who had a close relationship with the southern Ming Empire. As the leader of the younger generation of the Chang family, Chang Qianhao had already shown himself in the family and had a certain status. However, he was not a satisfied person, especially after he went to the capital of Ming and saw the power of the immortal abode and sky beyond sky. He worshipped the person behind all of this, Yang Qindong. Later, when the Yang Family Academy enrolled students, he signed up and became one of its members. Later, because of his excellent performance in business, he became one of Yang Qindong's disciples. After graduation, he returned to the Chang family in Jiangnan and did a lot of things for Yang Qindong, making the Chang family more powerful in Jiangnan's business. Chang Qianhao was also regarded by the older generation of the Chang family as one of the most promising people to inherit the family business. This time, he was summoned to Jiaoji because Yang Qindong wanted to develop business here. The Chang family's influence in the southern Ming Empire's business circle was not small. This was where he needed to rely heavily, which led to the current scene. Qian, how? Your body has grown stronger. Not bad. Get up. Looking at the disciple kneeling on the ground, his skin seemed to have become darker. Yang Qindong nodded with satisfaction and then pointed to a chair in front of him. He did not dare to refuse an elder's gift. Although Yang Qindong was only a few months older than Chang Qian, how the idea of a teacher for a day, a father for life was very popular at that time and was the most orthodox existence. Chang Qianhao sat in front of Yang Qindong with a trembling look. Don't be nervous. I called you over this time because I have something for you to do. Teacher is planning to start a business with Jiaoji as the center. He will start selling some of the Realm Beyond Heaven's products here, and then sell them to the southern Ming dynasty and the nearby countries. How about it? Do you have the confidence to do this well? Yang Qindong said with a smile. Even though Ming already had a Heavens Beyond trading company, transportation in ancient times wasn't very developed. When some goods were shipped to southern Ming or even Jiaoji, the price would rise quite a bit due to transportation issues. This wasn't beneficial for the quick sale of some goods in Crimson City. That was why he had decided to build a second commercial center around Jiaoji. This way, not only would he be able to prosper Jiaoji and restore its prosperity, he would also be able to earn more money and increase the flow of goods. Why not? Chang Qianhao had already thought of the reason before he had come. As for people saying that Jiaoji was still Jiaoji and that Yang Qindong's words didn't necessarily have the final say, he didn't think too much about it. With his trust in his teacher, he naturally didn't need to worry about the safety of his teacher. As expected, when he arrived at Jiaoji, everything had changed. The originally huge country had now become Yang Qindong's territory. If this happened to anyone else, they would definitely be shocked. However, when it was related to Yang Qindong, Chang Qianhao felt that it couldn't be any simpler. If someone really went to the Yang Family Academy and listened to Yang Qindong's lectures, they would know that this young teacher really knew everything from astronomy to geography. It was as if there was nothing he didn't know and nothing he couldn't understand. It wasn't strange for someone like this to be able to do anything because he possessed such magic and ability. Teacher, this student will definitely do his best and won't disappoint you, said Chang Qianhao excitedly. Although Yang Qindong hadn't mentioned what benefits he would give him from the start, sometimes it was best to not mention it. For example, when selling things to different places, there would always be a problem with the ratio, and there would always be a problem with the distributor. Yang Qindong didn't specify who would give him the benefits, so how this cake would be divided, wouldn't it all be up to him? This was an opportunity to indirectly strengthen the Chang family, as long as he was slightly biased towards the Chang family, and those who were on good terms with the Chang family, wouldn't he have everything? Of course, it would only be limited to a little manipulation, and he couldn't go overboard. Moreover, the Chang family would have to pay the price as well. Otherwise, no one could imagine the consequences of angering his teacher. If that day really came, it would be hard to say whether the entire Chang family would still exist. The conversation with Chang Qianhao soon ended. After all, Yang Qindong had a lot of things to do. He only needed to point out a way to do business, and the people below should know how to do it. His main focus was still on dealing with major issues. What was a major issue? Of course, it was how to deal with the relationship between Southern Ming, Bai Ming, and the Min King. The reason why the Min King was placed in the same position as Southern Ming and Bai Ming, that was because Yang Qindong didn't mean to be enemies with the Min King. On the contrary, he had to find a way to balance these three forces as much as possible. Only in this way they wouldn't point their spears at him, and he would have the opportunity to develop his own territory and do what he wanted to do. Beta Persei, prepare the meal. In the afternoon, I will meet with the envoys from Southern Ming. After all, they represent Ying sect, so it wouldn't be good to neglect them too much. After dealing with these matters in the morning, Yang Qindong stretched his back and stood up. Compared to Yang Qindong's satisfaction, the imperial eunuch Kai Ge, who was entrusted by Ying sect's Zhu Qizhen to come to Jiaoji to announce the edict, was not in the mood to eat or drink. Initially, he thought that he was here as a representative of Ying Zong to mediate the war in Jiaoji with a transcendent status. Thinking about it, with the war in a stalemate, both sides had probably suffered heavy losses, but no one wanted to take a step back. At this time, his appearance could give them a way out, and he would definitely be welcomed by everyone. In fact, it would be reasonable for them to seek some benefits for the Southern Ming Empire. This was also the reason why his uncle Kai Zhong worked hard to get this job for him. Ying sect's Zhu Qizhen was a person who remembered what he had eaten, but not what he had beaten. Because of Wang Zhen, Tu Mu was defeated, and he almost lost the throne. However, after establishing himself in Nanjing, he still reactivated the eunuch group. However, even though they were all eunuchs, their identities were different. For example, the eunuchs around Ying's sect had several factions. Other than Mao Mu, who mainly served Empress Qian, there were also Chao Jixiang, Qian, Sung Bao, and Kai Zhong. Regarding the emergence of these eunuch factions, Zhu Qizhen had always been looking for a way to balance them. He didn't want to let one faction become too big, but he also didn't want to let one faction be suppressed to the point where they couldn't survive. However, no matter what he did, it was difficult to balance a bowl of water. In comparison, Kai Zhong's faction was originally weak. Perhaps it was because Zhu Qizhen saw this point that he gave the task of announcing the edict to Kai Zhong's nephew, Kai Ge. Along the way, Kai Ge had been imagining what kind of identity he would have when he arrived in Jiaoji and what kind of awe-inspiring appearance he would have. However, in reality, the closer he got to the land of Jiaoji, the more complicated his thoughts became. Along the way, all he heard was news of the defeat of the Jiaoji army. When he arrived at Hanoi, the capital of Jiaoji, he heard about the battle at Shiyu City. The Jiaoji army had suffered a great defeat, and even the country's ruler had fled. It was beyond Kai Ji's expectations that the battle would come to an end in such a short time. As such, along the way from Hanoi to Shiyu City, most of the Jiaoji envoys who were following him had fled. Perhaps they were afraid of being implicated. Others could leave, but Kai Ge couldn't. Otherwise, not only would he implicate his uncle, but he would also have nowhere to go. What awaited him was the pursuit of the Eastern faction guards and the embroidered uniform guards. Bracing himself, he finally arrived at Shiyu City. Before he even entered the city, he saw several Jingguan. There were the 5,000 Jiaoji Jingguan from before, as well as the 30,000 Jiaoji Jingguan after the battle. When he saw the huge Jingguan from afar, Kai Ge couldn't help but feel his legs go weak. His scalp went numb, and his body trembled uncontrollably. He knew that his mission this time wouldn't be easy to complete. Regardless of his feelings, Kai Ge still made his way to Shiyu City. Indeed, he was warmly received, and only then did he feel better. When he was informed that the Duke of Loyalty would meet him in the afternoon, he began to ponder about how he should speak and complete his mission. Before he could think of anything, another piece of news came, disrupting Kai Ji's calm mind. The king of Jiaoji and the crown prince had been captured by Yang Qindong. Not only that, the king of Jiaoji even killed his young son in front of everyone in order to survive. Naturally, Kai Gu wouldn't doubt the authenticity of this news. After all, the ones who spread this news were some of the old officials of Jiaoji, and it was said that they had witnessed it with their own eyes. If this news was true, then there was a problem. Jiaoji had already been destroyed. Wouldn't it be ridiculous for him to appear here as the mediator of the war? While he was in a daze, someone came to see him, saying that the Duke of Loyalty wanted to meet him. With incomparable nervousness, Kai Gu came to a courtyard and saw the Duke of Loyalty of the great Ming dynasty playing with goldfish beside a pond in the garden. Chapter 5:37. Southern Ming's special envoy Kai Gu greets the Duke of Loyalty. When they were still 3 feet away, Kai Gu stopped under the signal of the guard on the side and said, "Okay, let him come over." Yang Qindong didn't turn his head, but his voice was clearly heard. Not to mention that a small Kai Gu didn't have the ability to do anything to him. Even if he had such ability, his ki would become stronger and stronger. Why should he be afraid of him? "Go over, but be careful." Peng Yu, who was guarding here, looked at Kai Gu coldly and reminded him coldly. Another team member standing on the side, Ba Daojiang, casually glanced over here, then turned around and began to observe the surrounding movements. He felt that it was interesting for his comrade Peng Yu to scare people like this, but he knew that his duty was still to guard the safety of this place. Although Shiyu City was occupied by the mercenaries, it didn't mean that it was safe here. In the past few days, there were more than a dozen assassination attempts aimed at the 6th young master. Although they were all daunting but not dangerous, this didn't mean that they could be careless. As for Kai Gu, in the face of Peng Yu's reminder, he had to show a flattering smile, then walked over to Yang Qindong's side. This time, he didn't need anyone to remind him. When he was 3 meters away, he took the initiative to stand there. At this time, Yang Qindong just finished sprinkling the fish food in his hand, then turned around, walked to the pavilion on the side, and sat down. He pointed at Kai Gu and said, "You also sit down. After all, you represent the emperor. You can't lose your identity." Yang Qindong had to add the last sentence. Otherwise, Kai Gu wouldn't have the courage to sit down. If this was the case, once the news spread out, it was inevitable that people would say that he didn't respect the Southern Ming emperor. He wouldn't take such a blame. Seeing that Yang Qindong's attitude was good, Kai Gu breathed a sigh of relief, then sat down opposite him. "Say it. What are you here for?" After waiting for Kai Gu to sit down, Yang Qindong asked, then looked at Kai Gu with interest. This kind of gaze was very similar to looking at animals in the zoo. Kai Gu also felt like he was being watched. He really didn't like this side of him and really wanted to say something. However, after thinking about it, he still held it in. It wasn't for any other reason than the fact that the person sitting across from him was too powerful. It was far beyond what he could resist, and it would only complicate matters. Since his identity was a little too weak, then he should just say whatever he wanted to say and focus on completing the mission. As for the embarrassment, it was better not to fuss about it. Duke of Loyalty and Courage. This one is here on the emperor's orders to urge the mercenaries to stop fighting with Jiaoji. I just didn't expect. Without waiting for Kai Gu to continue, Yang Qindong interrupted. "You didn't expect the war to end so quickly, did you?" "Yes." Kai Gu nodded, and then said according to what he thought at noon, "The mercenaries led by Duke of Loyalty and Courage are indeed very powerful. to be able to wipe out the main force of the Jiaoji army so quickly. This is something that no one expected. Kai Ge first praised Yang Qindong and the mercenary's strength, but then his expression changed slightly as he shook his head and said, "It's just that killing people is just a small matter. After all, King Li is the king of Annan personally conferred by the great Ming. If the Duke of Loyalty and Courage killed him just like that, how would others look at our emperor? Why don't we stop the war and let King Li compensate the mercenaries with some gold and silver so that they can learn a lesson?" Looking at Kai Ji's face, Yang Qindong really wanted to spit on Kai Ji's face and say no. However, since it was a negotiation, he had to know what the other party wanted. As such, he did not immediately get angry and pretended to listen. He nodded and said, "And please continue." Yang Qindong didn't object, which made Kai Ge happy in his heart. When he spoke again, his face had a little more confidence. If Jiaoji can stop the war, this is naturally something that the emperor and all of the great Ming people want to see. However, if Duke of Loyalty and Courage can lead the army up north and wipe out the Min King's rebel army, returning peace to the southern Ming, I'm afraid that Duke of Loyalty and Courage will be recorded in the history books. This is something that will go down in history. Of course, if Duke of Loyalty and Courage feels that it is difficult, that is not a problem. As long as you support the southern Ming with tens of millions of silver to train the new army, the effect will be the same. That's right, this silver can be considered a loan from the southern Ming to Duke of Loyalty and Courage. In order to express his gratitude to Duke of Loyalty and Courage, the emperor will definitely agree to give you the title of prince. In the future, as long as Ming agrees, this matter can be accomplished. As such, I'm afraid that the next time I see Duke of Loyalty and Courage, I will have to address you as prince. Just thinking about it makes others envious. He. Kai Ge was laughing, and Yang Qindong was also laughing after hearing this. They wanted him to withdraw his troops, and they also wanted him to fork out money. What he would get in return was an empty title of a prince. Moreover, this title still required the approval of the Northern Ming Empire. In the end, it was tantamount to not having any promises. He really did not know if there was something wrong with Kai Ji's head, or if Zhu Qijin was treating him like a 3-year-old child. Did he really think that he would give him whatever he wanted just by casually coaxing and saying a few nice words? It was truly laughable. He. Both of them were laughing, but as they laughed, Kai Ge could not laugh anymore. This was because he found that Yang Qindong was sneering, and there was a trace of anger in his eyes. A murderous aura unconsciously wrapped around his body, as if he was being stared at by a wild beast. It made it difficult for him to breathe. Cold sweat unknowingly began to flow from his forehead. It must be said that Kai Ge was also a person who knew martial arts. Normally, it would be difficult for 3 to 5 men to get close to him. If he had a long sword, he could even fight against 7 or 8 people. However, he did not know why, but when facing Yang Qindong, he found that he did not even have the strength to raise his arm. Did Emperor Yingzong say these words? After an unknown amount of time, Yang Qindong finally spoke again. When he spoke, the pressure suddenly decreased by a lot. At least, Kai Ge felt that it was not so difficult to breathe. Just now, he really felt that if he continued, he was afraid that even breathing would be a problem. That was equivalent to walking through the gates of hell. He definitely did not want to experience that kind of feeling a second time. Of course, this was also Yang Qindong's intention. Just now, he deliberately mobilized the qi in his body in order to try and see how much pressure it could bring to Kai Ge. Now, it seemed that he was very satisfied with the result. One must know that he only used less than 70% of his qi to make the other party unable to move. It could be imagined that if he used his full strength, The other party would only be lying on the ground now. This was only the effect of targeting a single person. If he wanted to deal with a group of people, the effect would be greatly reduced. Fortunately, he could feel that the qi in his body had been growing stronger ever since it appeared out of nowhere. He believed that as long as he guided it well, it would only become more and more powerful in the future. Given enough time, it shouldn't be a problem for him to deal with a group of people. This is the emperor's intention. Even though he felt immense pressure, Kaige did not forget the rules. As he spoke, he even cupped his hands in the air to show his respect to the emperor. Then, do you think that there is any meaning in saying all this now? Of course, Yang Chendong knew that this was Ingzong's intention. Otherwise, how would a small eunuch like him dare to do such a thing on his own? However, he still asked the question because he wanted to put the pressure on Kaige. Under the pressure, the might of the qi was naturally displayed. Kaige shook his head. To be honest, I'm afraid that no one would expect the mercenary army to be so powerful that the Duke of Loyalty could pacify the Jiaoji army in such a short time. Looking at it this way, these requests are somewhat inappropriate. Kaige also knew that when he said those words, he was going against the emperor's orders. But there was no other way. The situation was stronger than the person, not to mention that Yang Chendong was sitting opposite him. After what happened just now, he was really afraid that if he said something wrong, Yang Chendong would directly kill him. Even though killing the emperor's envoy was a huge matter, and it was normal for people to view it as a rebellion, it was even more normal for one's entire family to be executed. However, this also depended on who it was. With Yang Chendong and the powerful mercenaries behind him, he did not believe that Emperor Ingzong would be willing to offend people and avenge him for an imperfect person like him. Even if he did avenge him, so what? His own people were already dead, so there was no point in saying those things, right? Seeing that Kaige was still sensible, Yang Chendong nodded his head in satisfaction. He also intentionally retracted his aura so that Kaige would not feel so pressured. Then he said, "It's impossible to retreat from Jiaoji. Let's put it this way. When the war has reached this stage, it's no longer up to me to decide. The leader of the mercenary army has already started to interfere. He has set his sights on Jiaoji and wants to take it for himself. Of course, if Emperor Ingzong is unhappy, he can send troops to fight. I won't object to this." After deciding on the direction of the formation, Yang Chendong said, "Maybe you don't know, but if it wasn't for me, the mercenary army's target would not be Jiaoji, but the entire great Ming dynasty. You can also see how powerful the mercenary army is. They have such strength now." When he heard Yang Chendong say that the mercenary army's target was the great Ming dynasty, Kaige was indeed a little afraid. If it was the great Ming dynasty a few years ago, which was the great Ming dynasty that had not experienced the changes of the earth, and it could still be said that they could wrestle with the mercenary army. After all, they did not have anything else, but they had a large territory and a large population. But now, the great Ming dynasty was divided into north and south, and now there was the addition of Prince Min's forces. Emperor Ingzong himself was in a terrible fix. If the mercenary army joined in, the consequences could be imagined. Chapter 538. Thinking about the current situation of the southern Ming Empire, Kai Gu couldn't help but feel short of breath. At this point, the initiative was completely in Yang Chendong's hands. Seeing that Kai Gu didn't speak anymore and sighed as if he had accepted his fate, Yang Chendong smiled in his heart. Some people were like this, always thinking that they were the emperor and everyone should listen to them. But once they met a tough opponent, their attitude would immediately change. Perhaps this was the human instinct to bully the weak and fear the strong. However, Yang Chendong wouldn't pity Ingzong because he already saw that such a person wouldn't be able to lead the Han people to the peak of the world. Since others couldn't do it, then he would leave everything to him. Yang Chendong already had an idea in his heart. When he talked about some things, his tone naturally wouldn't be polite. Speaking of the Battle of Jiaoji, it isn't over yet. The captured king, Li Li, has already said that the person who sent people to assassinate me was his subordinate, Fan Yuhai. This time, this person escaped and went to the Lansang kingdom. If I don't catch this person, it will be difficult to resolve the hatred in my heart. Therefore, the mercenaries will probably send troops to the Lansang kingdom. Of course, unless they are willing to send Fan Yuhai's head. If they want to cover it up, there will be a huge battle. Of course, this matter shouldn't have anything to do with the Southern Ming Empire. This duke is telling you this because I hope that when you meet the emperor, you can tell him what the mercenaries are going to do next. Just let him know in his heart what to do next. This was clearly reminding Kai Gu that not only would the mercenaries not listen to Ingzong's orders, but they would also continue to fight. As for when the fight would end, it was hard to say. Just like now, they sent troops to the Lansang kingdom with the excuse of finding the culprit, Fan Yuhai, who knew what kind of excuse they would use next time. After all, they could always find a reason to do so. In other words, if they were willing, the mercenary army could continue to expand endlessly until one day, when their strength grew, they might even come to the great Ming Empire to cause trouble. He thought that if the mercenary army really cleaned up these small countries one by one and finally integrated their strength, then at that time, there would be no difference between them and the great Ming Empire. Then, wouldn't the great Ming Empire be in danger? Always followed the lead of the great expression was constantly changing. At the same time, he said, they are also one of the vassal states of our great Ming Empire. Since Fan, I believe that as long as we reason with them and move them emotionally, they will definitely not cover up the existence of Fan Yuhai. However, please give them some time to deal with this matter properly. And every debt had its debtor. I can try my best to help with this. Have to look after all, whoever I am also a citizen of the great Ming dynasty. However, you should also know that we cannot delay for too long. If we delay for too long, once the leader of the mercenary army gets angry, I don't know what will happen. Yang Chendong nodded. He originally didn't have the intention to make a move on the Lansang kingdom immediately. It wasn't that he didn't have sufficient military strength, but if he didn't consolidate his rear, it would be easy for problems to arise. Right now, he needed to focus on how to turn Jiaoji into his rear base. Only after this base was stabilized, then he would proceed to the next step of expansion. Of course, if someone wanted to show off like a clown, then he wouldn't hold back. Naturally, other people wouldn't be able to see his thoughts, so he needed to use this opportunity to pressure the Southern Ming Empire and Ingzong. At the same time, it was also a method to numb the Southern Ming Empire. He wanted to create a misconception that the strength of the mercenary army was limited. It was already very difficult for them to conquer Jiaoji, let alone the Lansang kingdom. This way, the Southern Ming Empire might look down on the mercenary army, and this would create more time for him to develop. The matter regarding Jiaoji was settled just like that. In short, he couldn't return the money, and he believed that Ingzong would accept this fact. However, there was nothing he could do even if Ingzong didn't accept it. Would he really bring his troops over? putting aside whether he had the strength to do so. If he really dared to do so, Min King and Bai Ming would definitely use this opportunity to deal with him. By then, the southern Ming Empire could only become history and disappear from the stage. After settling the matter of Jiaoji, Yang Qindong brought up the matter of Ing Zong wanting to borrow money. Envoy Kai, it's not impossible for the southern Ming Empire to borrow money, but there are two conditions. Kai Gu originally thought that with Yang Qindong's domineering attitude, he wouldn't be able to get the money. Now that he suddenly heard this, Kai Gu perked up. Please speak, Duke of Loyalty. First, the Yang family bank has to enter the southern Ming Empire and set up branches in some of the bigger cities. Only then can we better allocate the money and work for the southern Ming Empire. Second, even if we borrow money with collateral, we don't know what the southern Ming Empire will be willing to pay. If we don't have anything, this matter won't be easy to handle. Don't you think so? Yang Qindong looked at Kai Gu with a deadpan expression, as if he was doing business. As for the first condition, Kai Gu really couldn't say anything about the Yang family bank entering the southern Ming Empire. After all, if you wanted to ask someone for help, then it was normal for their bank to enter your territory. Not to mention, it was under the guise of working for the southern Ming Empire. So there was even less reason to reject it. As for the second condition, Kai Gu really didn't think about it. In his opinion, the emperor was giving you face by asking you to borrow money. Why would he ask for collateral? Of course, he wouldn't say such thoughts in front of Yang Qindong. Who knew if it would anger him? The feeling of being unable to breathe had not completely subsided, and he didn't want to feel it again. Therefore, after thinking for a while, Kai Gu asked, then I don't know what kind of collateral the southern Ming Empire needs to pay if they want to get the money. What kind of collateral do you have? Yang Qindong didn't fall into the other party's trap. Instead, he held the initiative and asked back. Originally, Kai Gu wanted to wait for Yang Qindong to speak first and see what the other party liked. This way, he could bargain properly. However, he didn't expect that the other party would kick the question back to him. Instead, it made him fall into deep thought. Speaking of which, the matter of borrowing money with collateral was a common occurrence in the Ming Empire. Things like fields, houses, antiques from home, and women's jewelry were all common collateral. Even pawn shops were willing to accept these things in exchange for money to give to others. However, this time, the southern Ming Empire didn't need tens of thousands of silver, but tens of millions of silver. In the face of such a large amount, ordinary items naturally wouldn't be enough. This made things difficult for Kai Gu. He really didn't know what to do. Naturally, Kai Gu was just a mouthpiece. He didn't have the right to decide how this matter would develop. In the end, it would still be reported to Emperor Ing. What he needed now was to figure out what could satisfy Yang Qindong and make him lend money to the southern Ming Empire. Unable to think of a reason, Kai Gu showed a humble appearance and looked at Yang Qindong. He said, Duke of Loyalty and Courage, don't tease me. We really don't understand these things. You just need to say something, and I will naturally report it to the emperor. He will be wise and make the final decision. Originally, he wanted to keep Kai Gu in suspense, but seeing that Kai Gu was really not good at this, Yang Qindong had to dispel the idea of letting the other party guess. He said, to be honest, there is indeed nothing in the southern Ming Empire that the mercenary leader would like. Min Wang and Bai Ming are eyeing covetously from the side. Even if you are willing to give us land, I think the mercenary leader may not agree. Moreover, you don't want the mercenaries to intervene in the internal affairs of the great Ming Empire. Hee 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 hee. Kai Gu smiled awkwardly. What a joke. Land was the foundation of a country. Even if the mercenaries wanted it, Zhu Qizhen wouldn't give it to them. Besides, the southern Ming Empire was already chaotic enough. If the mercenaries were to intervene at this time, wouldn't it be even more chaotic? Looking at Kai Ji's obviously fawning smile, Yang Chendong knew that he had spoken the other party's mind. He continued, "This time, the amount of money that Ingzong needs is really too much. If it's converted into antiques and similar items, it would probably be an astronomical figure. You can't afford it." "Yes, yes," Kai Gu nodded and said, "The emperor is very generous to us servants. Usually, he would reward us with a lot of things. Now that there are years of wars, the national treasury is already empty." Yang Chendong nodded to show that he understood. He hesitated and said, "Since the land is useless and there are no antiques, then I really don't know what is valuable. I'm afraid this matter is not easy to handle." Yang Chendong revealed an awkward expression and even had the intention of retreating. Kai Gu saw all of this and couldn't help but feel his heart tighten. This time, he was ordered to come here. The matter of the Jiaoji armistice had already failed. If he couldn't handle the matter of the silver, he could imagine what would be waiting for him when he returned to Nanjing. At this moment, he was no longer thinking about meritorious service. He was thinking about how to deal with this matter. The best result was that he didn't do anything. Therefore, he absolutely couldn't let any accidents happen to the silver tails. He immediately said to Yang Chendong with a bitter face, "Please don't, Duke Xiongdan. No matter what, our great Ming dynasty is still a powerful country. We have a large territory and a large population. It's just a few tens of millions of taels of silver. As long as the wind is calm and the world is peaceful, it won't be long before we can earn these taels of silver. If you want to borrow money from them, you will have to get their permission. In other words, you need to give them something that will satisfy them. If that's the case, the only thing you can offer is your large population. How about this? There's no need for any collateral. The Southern Ming Empire will provide the manpower and will provide the money. Let's just do the transaction. Trading people? But I don't know what the rules are." Kai Gu was a little confused by Yang Chendong's words, and his face was in a state of confusion. It must be said that there were indeed cases of human trafficking among the people. However, it was mostly due to the lack of servants in large families. Only then would they occasionally buy some. It was normal to say a dozen more or a few less. The amount of money traded was also very limited. It could be as small as a few silver taels or as large as a few hundred silver taels. But this time, the Southern Ming Empire needed tens of millions of silver taels. How many people would they need to buy? Seeing Kai Ji's doubts, Yang Chendong explained, "Human trafficking has been going on since ancient times. I don't think there's a need for me to say anything about it. The only problem with this transaction is that the Southern Ming Empire needs too much money. Naturally, the amount of people needed to be traded must be large. How about this? I will make the decision for the leader of the mercenaries, my brother. We will use 20 silver taels to buy a woman from our great Ming Empire. Children under 10 years old will be 15 silver taels. Elders over 50 years old will be 5 silver taels. Males between 14 to 40 years old will be 50 silver taels per person. As for how many people the Southern Ming Empire can provide, the mercenaries will pay the same amount of money. How about it?" After beating around the bush for a long time, Yang Chendong finally brought up the matter of him needing a large number of people in a very shady manner. The reason why he didn't bring up this matter at the start was because he was afraid that Kai Gu would have other ideas. Like now, when the other party was at his wit's end, bringing up this kind of exchange condition would be more acceptable. As expected, Kai Gu didn't think too much about it. On the contrary, he began to calculate the cost of this human trafficking transaction in his mind. Using 20 silver taels for a woman as an example, this kind of price wasn't considered very generous. After all, When some large families wanted to buy maidservants, they would often offer a higher price than this. However, the mercenaries wanted a large number of people. They weren't picky, especially in terms of appearance. This wasn't something that those large families could compare to. Since a woman was 20 silver taels, 10 of them would be 200 silver taels, 100 would be 2,000 silver taels. Then what about 10,000? What about 100,000? Wouldn't that be 2 million taels? In addition to the elderly and children, 100,000 would be another 2 million taels. The existence of these people wouldn't be of much use to the great Ming Empire. On the contrary, their existence was mostly a waste of food. If these people could be thrown out, then wouldn't the southern Ming Empire be able to save a lot of resources? Not to mention, a young man would be worth 50 silver taels. 100,000 people would be a total of 5 million taels. Speaking of which, what the southern Ming Empire had the most right now was naturally the population. Especially with the Min King's rebellion, many refugees from Yunnan, Guangxi, and Guangdong were heading towards Nanjing. On the way here, Kai Gu saw countless refugees. With a rough estimate, the population was at least 1 to 2 million. If all these people were traded to the mercenaries, how much would it be worth? Wouldn't the money for the training of the new army be easily gathered? Not to mention that the mission would be completed. It would also reduce the pressure on the southern Ming Empire. Wasn't this killing 2 birds with 1 stone? Presumably, after the mission was completed, the emperor would definitely look at him in a new light. The more he thought about it, the more excited Kai Ji's heart became. When he looked at Yang Qindong, there was a burning feeling in his eyes. Duke Shondan, I wonder if there is a limit to this transaction? There is no limit. It depends on how much money you need and how many people you can provide. Of course, there's one thing that needs to be said, and that is that we won't force you to buy them. You shouldn't force us to sell them to you either. If you force them and they try to escape or commit suicide on the way here, then we won't take the blame. Those people's bodies still have to be sent back, and the money has to be returned. Otherwise, if we anger the mercenaries, it won't be good for anyone. Yang Qindong had to make things clear. He understood the way the southern Ming Empire did things. In order to achieve their goal, they would do anything. If they really sent some weak and sick people to his side and kept all the good seedlings, then who knew how many families would be broken up? Under such circumstances, would the Han people who were traded be able to stay and work at his side with peace of mind? If that was the case, it would take a lot of energy to do the ideological work of these people every day. In order to prevent such a thing from happening, some ugly things must be said first. Of course, our southern Ming Empire won't do such a despicable thing. Kai Gu quickly waved his hand, although he did have such an idea. In fact, similar things would happen in the process of trading people, but it really couldn't be done too much. Otherwise, angering the mercenaries really wouldn't be beneficial. That's good. Since Envoy Kai knows how to handle this matter, then I won't say anything more. This is the matter. Chapter 540. Kai Gu, who knew that there was no time to lose, packed up his luggage after leaving Yang Qindong's residence. In less than half an hour, he left Shiyu City and went straight back to Nanjing. Tiger's man reported the news of Kai Ji's departure to Yang Qindong, and then said with some worry, "Young master, do you think the southern Ming Empire will agree to the human trade? They will. They have no choice now. Besides, there are wars everywhere, and now there are many refugees. They are still worried about how to solve this matter. We have given them such a gap, they will definitely take advantage of it." Yang Qindong said confidently. It was no wonder that he would be so confident. At that time, the idea of people-oriented did not penetrate deep into people's hearts, and no emperor would really pay much attention to it. It was nothing more than when there was no conscription, there would be a shortage of people. As for normal times, there wouldn't be so many people thinking about it. Moreover, the great Ming Empire had just experienced its heyday, and the population was more than 60 million. This time, it was just a transaction of 100,000 people. It was really not a big deal. Inform everyone that the Yang family bank is ready to enter Nanjing, Songjiang, and Jianing. In addition, inform Qiqian City to prepare enough silver. If there is not enough silver when the transaction is done, it will be a joke. Yang Qindong gave an order to Tiger's man. The bank was newly established, and the silver reserves were naturally needed. However, relying on the Baiming Yang family bank was obviously not enough to support the overall situation. Fortunately, Qiqian City had already accumulated a lot of gold and silver. Not to mention how much profit the Navy could make from controlling the sea area, the advanced products produced by the factories were in short supply once they were shipped out, and they could all be sold at a high price. How could there be a shortage of silver? Tiger's man left, leaving Yang Qindong standing in the yard with an indifferent expression. This human trade was originally part of his plan, but he hadn't figured out how to do it. Kai Ji's appearance gave him a chance to do it openly. It could be imagined that once there were enough Han people, the road of expansion could continue. Otherwise, they could only fight for the country and not defend it. This kind of expansion would lose its meaning. Of course, it would take some time for the human trafficking to be completed. What he needed to do now was to settle the matter in Jiaoji, how to stabilize the hearts of the people, and how to make this place a bridgehead for the mercenaries to attack and retreat was the focus of the recent work. Call Kongjie and Songjie here. Yang Qindong thought about the importance of talents, so he thought of the two political commissars. Yes, Beta Persei responded and turned to leave. Only Yang Qindong's figure was left in the courtyard, standing between heaven and earth. With the arrival of the mercenaries and 45,000 educated youths, the situation in Shiyu City had undergone earth-shattering changes. The streets were much cleaner than usual. There were more shops in the city that could be freely traded. The granaries in the city were also completely opened, allowing the people to trade freely. There were many more patrolling soldiers on the streets to ensure the stability of law and order. At the same time, there were also some criminals who wanted to fish in troubled waters, so that the safety of the people could be better maintained. To be able to restore the city that was originally damaged by the war, especially the destruction caused by the mortar shells, in such a short period of time, it was naturally beneficial to the joint efforts of everyone. Among them, the two political commissars who were in charge of political work were especially important. Under Yang Qindong's request, the political workers not only needed to be able to stabilize the morale of the army during wartime, but also needed to display their unique abilities in the city's construction. In this regard, Kongjie and Songjie did very well. Under their command and leadership, the political workers at all levels in the army displayed their abilities. Shiyu City could be said to be changing every day. Just when the two were busy, a member of the 2nd Guard Squad found the two political commissars and said that the 6th young master wanted to see them. The members of the Guard Squad had long been in the eyes of the officers at all levels, so they naturally recognized them. Seeing the person coming, the two political commissars did not say anything. After handing over the matters at hand, they followed the person to the temporary palace in the city. In the same courtyard, Yang Qindong had some fruits and tea on the table in front of him. Seeing the two political commissars coming over under the lead of Beta Persei, Yang Qindong smiled and waved at them. "Come sit here." Kongjie and Songjie were somewhat flattered and hurriedly stepped forward. Then each found a seat and sat down. The Jiaoji kingdom was destroyed so quickly. Not to mention others, Even the mercenary officers did not expect it. Because of this, Yang Qindong was once again a legend. While his glorious image was deeply rooted in people's hearts, it also made people look up to him even more. Sensing the nervousness of the two political commissars, Yang Qindong laughed and said, "Relax, you don't have to be so nervous here. This time, I called you over because I know you've worked hard. Let's relax and have a casual chat." Kong Jia and Song She did not really think that the sixth young master called them over for a chat. The two of them sat there and looked at each other, then said in unison, "Sixth young master, if you have anything to say, just say the word." "Ha, okay." Seeing that the two political commissars knew that he had something to say to them, Yang Qindong smiled, then got up and poured a cup of tea for each of them. His attitude made the two of them stand up immediately to be able to have the sixth young master pour tea for them. This treatment was too good. The two of them felt uneasy. Fortunately, Yang Qindong quickly explained the reason for calling them over. "The two of you have worked hard during this period of time, and your work has been very effective. However, even though we have conquered Jiaoji, this is only the first step. How to govern this place and let the people here get used to our governance is the most important thing. How about it? Have the two of you ever thought of quitting the military and staying here to govern?" Yang Qindong chuckled. He was ready to appoint generals. People say that it is easier to conquer a country than to defend it. The current Jiaoji was facing such a problem. It was impossible for the mercenaries to stay here for too long. They had too many things to do. Therefore, in the future, this place would have to be independent. Even though the Jiaoji mercenaries and the natives of Jiaoji like Hongjin, Chendi, and Wan Chunqing were in charge, Yang Qindong wouldn't be at ease if he didn't leave his own people behind. The reason he called the two of them over was obviously to choose one of them and leave one of them behind to govern Jiaoji. Yang Qindong had quite a number of generals under his command. After training and systematic learning, many of them had the ability to lead an army and fight on their own. However, in comparison, he had enough generals, but not enough civil officials. There were even fewer civil officials who could govern a place. After much consideration, Yang Qindong set his sights on the two political commissars, Kong Jia and Song Jia. After a period of observation, the performance of these two people was very good. So Yang Qindong could rest assured and entrust them with heavy responsibilities. In fact, he could have ordered one of them to stay behind, but he didn't do so. He wanted to see what they wanted to do. After all, nothing forcibly done was worth it. The two of them didn't expect the sixth young master to call them over for this. Caught off guard, the two of them hesitated. As the political commissar of the 1st Regiment, it was rare for him to lead an army alone. However, he was still one of the commanding officers of the 1st Regiment. Furthermore, he had such a powerful mercenary army. When he fought a battle, it was truly a pleasure to him. Moreover, with such a modern army under his command, he would be able to contribute a lot to the war. If they were to withdraw from the army now, it would be equivalent to giving away a lot of their contributions. This made them somewhat reluctant. Besides, they could tell that the destruction of Jiaoji was only the result of the mercenary army's initial efforts. There would be many more such incidents in the future. If they stayed behind in Jiaoji now, would they still be able to climb to a higher position in the future? Everyone has their own selfish motives, but they are also ambitious. If they stayed in Jiaoji, it would be equivalent to stopping their progress. It was no wonder they were in such a difficult position. Their expressions kept changing. Yang Qindong saw everything, but he didn't say anything. He was waiting for the two of them to make their own decisions. If they didn't want to withdraw from the army, he wouldn't force them to do anything. He would continue to look for suitable candidates. However, the two of them had a lower status in his heart. After all, they didn't see the big picture and couldn't see the big picture. Such an officer's future was limited. Time passed by slowly. After Yang Qindong drank 2 cups of tea, Kong Jie and Song Jie finally came to a decision. After looking at each other, they spoke at the same time. "Sixth young master, I am willing to stay." Yang Qindong didn't expect the 2 of them to speak at the same time. Of course, he was very satisfied. Good, good. It's rare for you to see the big picture. Since that's the case, Yang Qindong's gaze lingered between Kong Jie and Song Jie. He looked at Kong Jie and Song Jie and said, "Song Jie will stay. Other than the 30,000 Jiaoji mercenaries, I will leave you with a platoon of Lung Feng and 2 battalions of auxiliary soldiers. Also, if you have any other requests, feel free to state them." Choosing Song Jie over Kong Jie was naturally because the former was only a political commissar of the auxiliary army. Compared to political work, Kong Jie was obviously better. Therefore, Yang Qindong had long wanted Song Jie to stay in the company. Since Kong Jie had taken the initiative to ask for it, he decided to make the decision. However, before the troops and horses were mobilized, the provisions had to be mobilized first. In order to build a place, the most important thing was money. That was why he proposed to set up a young family bank here. As long as there was a bank, the initial funds could be operated in the form of loans. When there was money in the future, it could be slowly repaid. Sure. Yang Qindong nodded and agreed after Song Jie finished speaking. Setting up a Yang family bank in Jiaoji was part of his plan. Even if Song Jie didn't mention it, he would have arranged for someone to do it. "Then I have no further questions." Song Jie quickly nodded. Since the 6th young master had already arranged everything, there wasn't much for him to consider. As for whether he would encounter problems in his work in the future, he would just have to deal with them when he encountered them. "Good. If there's anything else, you can send someone to contact me. I will settle it for you." Yang Qindong didn't have the experience of building a small country. Therefore, he couldn't overthink everything. Therefore, he gave Song Jie the privilege of being able to contact him at any time. The matter was finally settled. Song Jie became the temporary person in charge of Jiaoji, and Chang Qianhao became the first chairman of the Chamber of Commerce. Yang Qindong hoped that the 2 of them could work together to transform Jiaoji into a truly prosperous place. The matter of Jiaoji could be put aside for now. Yang Qindong set his sights on the neighboring Lancang kingdom. Fan Yuhai brought 20,000 Jiaoji elites and fled to this kingdom. Logically speaking, this was a good excuse to launch a military attack on the Lancang kingdom. Just like when he dealt with Jiaoji previously, he was here under the banner of the Southern Ming Emperor, and also to avenge the assassination attempt on his life. With enough justification, he had a good reason to attack. Now that he had an excuse to deal with the Lancang kingdom, Yang Qindong really wanted to lead the mercenaries to annihilate the kingdom. Unfortunately, before Yang Qindong could decide what to do, the Lancang kingdom had already sent someone to inform him that they were encircling Fan Yuhai's troops. They would definitely give the mercenaries and the Duke of Loyalty of the Great Ming dynasty an explanation. Initially, he thought that it would be too big of a step to make a move on the Lancang kingdom before Jiaoji was stabilized. Since there was no excuse to attack, Yang Qindong could only wait and observe. At the same time, he used this opportunity to train his troops. Speaking of which, in the Battle of Jiaoji, there were too many auxiliary soldiers who contributed greatly and earned the right to be promoted to the Cold Vanguard. At the same time, there were also many temporary auxiliary soldiers who performed well and earned the right to be promoted to auxiliary soldiers. Now, the military was focused on this matter. Even the political commissar of the Cold Vanguard Regiment, Kong Jie, was no longer busy with the construction of Jiaoji. Instead, he started to organize the promotion assessment. Everyone was busy. Yang Chendong brought the first and second guards to join the assessment team. He acted as an invigilator to assess the outstanding soldiers who were promoted from auxiliary soldiers to cold vanguard. Southern Ming capital, Nanjing City. Kai Ge, who was covered in dust, rushed back. As soon as he entered the city, before he could even take a sip of water, an embroidered uniform guard appeared in front of him and brought him to Zhu Qizhen of the Ying sect. "Beloved Minister Kai, how did it go?" Zhu Qizhen asked anxiously when he saw Kai Gu in the side hall of the palace. In the side hall, Chao Jixiang, Qian, Song Liang, Kai Zhong, and a few other eunuch leaders were also present. Kai Gu knelt on the ground and recounted everything he had seen and heard along the way, including the current situation of Jiaoji. Listening to Kai Gu kneeling on the ground and saying something, Zhu Qizhen's face was sometimes gloomy and sometimes relaxed. His expression was constantly changing. Not only him, but the eunuchs standing below were also shocked. They didn't expect Jiaoji to be wiped out in such a short period of time. This gave them a new understanding and evaluation of the strength of the mercenaries. In less than an hour, Kai Getsai reported everything he had seen and heard, especially everything he had talked about with the Duke of Loyalty. Then, he kowtowed to the ground with a respectful expression, waiting for the emperor to deal with him. Jiaoji was destroyed just like that, and Lily was captured alive. Zhu Qizhen said in a daze. It could be seen that the high and mighty Zhu Qizhen's expression wasn't too good. Even when the great Ming dynasty was at its peak, it was impossible for them to crush Jiaoji like they did with the mercenaries. Perhaps the great Ming dynasty's ideology of moderation played a role in this. They never had the thought of destroying other countries. But no matter what, they couldn't do anything to Jiaoji. Now, however, the mercenaries easily destroyed them. Even the old king Lily fell into the hands of the mercenaries and became their prisoner. Judging others by their own standards, how could he not feel a trace of sadness when he thought about such a thing? If the mercenaries could destroy Jiaoji so easily, wouldn't it be a huge headache if they became the enemy of the great Ming dynasty? What was going on with Yang Chendong? Why didn't he see that he had this kind of ability before? Was it really just a coincidence that he saved the mercenary leader who had never appeared before? And that's how he gained his current power? At this moment, countless thoughts appeared in Zhu Qizhen's mind. He actually felt a faint sense of worry in his heart. Zhu Qizhen was speechless for a long time. Chao Jixiang, who was at the side, saw this and guessed the reason. This was also a skill of the head eunuch. If he couldn't guess the emperor's thoughts, he wouldn't be far from being marginalized. In the eyes of the eunuchs, the emperor was their sky and their earth. Naturally, no accidents could happen to him. Chao Jixiang only hesitated for a moment before advising, "Your Majesty, Jiaoji is a small country with a population of less than 2 million compared to the great Ming dynasty. Its cities are like fireflies competing with the bright moon. How can they be compared to the sun? Even if the mercenaries came to occupy our great Ming dynasty, they wouldn't have the strength to do so. It's just that the mercenaries reminded us that we have to become stronger ourselves." The first part of his words was to enlighten Zhu Qizhen, while the latter part was hinting at him. Sadness wouldn't solve the problem. Only by developing oneself and strengthening oneself would one be able to do so. To be able to become the emperor, one's wisdom was naturally not something ordinary people could compare to. Just now, he couldn't think straight, which was why he revealed a worried expression. Now that he heard Chao Jixiang's reminder, he thought about his own advantage. If he had to make an analogy, they were like an elephant, and the mercenaries were like a poisonous snake. No matter how big the other party's appetite was, they wouldn't be able to swallow him in one gulp. That would only cause indigestion. Otherwise, when he dealt with the Huang bandit army, Wouldn't he have taken the opportunity to do something to the Southern Ming dynasty? However, they didn't. This was already very clear. Of course, the other party's strength could increase at any time. If he couldn't grasp this opportunity to help the Southern Ming dynasty rise, then it would be hard to say what would happen in the future. Zhu Qizhen, who had made up his mind to become stronger, seemed to be filled with energy at this moment. Looking at the kneeling Kai Ge, he said, "Dear Minister Kai, please repeat the conditions that the Duke of Loyalty and Courage mentioned." Chapter 542. Yes, Your Majesty. Kai Ge nodded and repeated Yang Qindong's request. In the following time, Zhu Qizhen and the eunuchs discussed how much money they needed to train the new army and how many people they needed to trade. Just as Yang Qindong had expected, Zhu Qizhen did not pay much attention to population, especially after Yunnan, Guangxi, and Guangdong were occupied by the Min King's forces. Many refugees escaped from there and were now entrenched in the southeastern provinces. There were even many who were heading towards Nanjing. According to the reports of the officials, the appearance of these refugees had greatly affected the security of other places. Their daily necessities alone were a big problem, which often gave the local officials a headache. This time, they could use the method of trading to transport these people out. As for whether this would strengthen the mercenary army, not to mention that they did not provide the population, did the mercenary army not have other ways? It was very difficult to make these refugees into an army. These people did not have enough to eat, they did not have warm clothes, and their health was generally not good. Otherwise, the Southern Ming Empire would have recruited them into the army. Otherwise, the Min King's forces would not have easily let them leave their territory. In short, these people were of little value to Zhu Qizhen. Most of them were even burdens. It was a good opportunity to give them to the mercenary army and let them have a headache. It was also a good way to make them worry, so that they would not threaten him with a strong army. After thinking it through, Zhu Qizhen began to order the 3 eunuchs to count the refugee population. According to him, other than those young people with strong bodies and beautiful young women, the rest of the refugees could be used for trading. If they could exchange a large amount of money, the Southern Ming Empire would have the strength to train the new army and strengthen themselves. The number of refugees had already been reported by the local officials. The number of refugees had reached 5 million. Most of them were refugees from Guangdong. Because they had been prepared for the arrival of King of Min's forces in Guangdong, they only got some fields and houses, but very few people. The number of refugees in Guangdong alone had reached nearly 3 million. Among the 5 million people, the ratio of women and men was almost equal, each taking up a third. The ratio of old people and children was also almost equal, each taking up a sixth. With this calculation, a rough result could be obtained from the accounts. The women had about 5 million, each 20 taels of silver, which was 30 million taels of silver. The old people had about 900,000, each 5 taels of silver, which was 5 million taels of silver. The children had about 900,000, each 15 taels of silver, which was 5 million taels of silver. The men had about 1 million, each 500,000 taels of silver, which was 50 million taels of silver. Altogether, the total population was about 4,300,000 people. If they were to trade, they would be able to obtain 98 million taels of silver. After the number came out, even Zhu Qizhen could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. He didn't expect that a group of vagrants could increase his income so much. Once they had this 98 million taels of silver, the economy of the Southern Ming Empire would be revitalized. Not only would they have the money to train the new army, they could also make more armor and weapons. At the same time, they could also use it to develop the country. It was not impossible for the Southern Ming Empire to have a drastic change. Ha, good, good, good. Zhu Qizhen said the word good 3 times in a row, completely revealing the excitement in his heart. Pass down my decree. Order all the provinces to send all the refugees to the Songjiang prefecture. And not only the refugees, but also those who have committed crimes and have not changed. They will also be sent to the Songjiang prefecture. Great companion, this matter will be handed over to you and beloved Minister Kai Zhong. That's right. Don't forget about the Yang family's 4th brother. Immediately remove the surveillance on him and let him quickly contact the Yang family bank. Tell him the specific amount of money we can trade. Don't let them not take out enough money when the time comes. At this moment, Zhu Qizhen had already thrown the threat of Yang Qindong to the side. What he needed to do now was to let the Southern Ming Empire rise again under his leadership. Zhu Qizhen's imperial edicts were passed down without the discussion of the ministers. The reason why he did this was because he did not want to give people the chance to argue. With his understanding of the ministers, once they knew that he had a human trade with the mercenaries, they would definitely stand up to stop it, even though these ministers were already helpless against the refugees. They had read the books of sages since they were young, so they naturally wanted to learn how to be a saint. They would definitely not agree to abandon the people like this. Since they would not agree, then why did he need their permission? He was the emperor. However, there was no such thing as an airtight pants in the world, not to mention that this matter involved so many people. In less than a day, the ministers below knew about this matter. Then, they hurriedly walked into the palace. Needless to say, they were here to persuade him. Regarding this, Zhu Qizhen was already prepared. He used his body as an excuse and refused to meet anyone. As for whether they would make a fuss when they did not see him, it was up to them. If it were not for the Southern Ming Empire's ancestral teachings that there was no need to punish a doctor, he really did not mind looking for a few people at this time to kill the prestige of those ministers who only knew how to eat, drink, and enjoy every day, and were useless at critical times. After the imperial edict was passed down, the first to benefit was naturally the Yang family's 4th master, Yang. He was originally staying in Jianing Prefecture. Suddenly, a group of embroidered uniform guards came and took him away from the Yang family's ancestral home without any explanation. This scene was seen by many people at that time. Originally, Jianing Prefecture's magistrate, Li Daotong, wanted to stop it because he knew that this person was the brother of the Duke of Loyal and Courageous. Once something happened in his territory, how could he get away with it? However, when he appeared with a group of magistrates and saw that they were all embroidered uniform guards wearing flying fish robes, black gauze hats, imperial belts, and embroidered spring sabers at their waists, he immediately became terrified. These were all the emperor's people. If he dared to stand out and say half a word, he was afraid that he would be arrested together with them. Seeing that Li Daotong did not even dare to breathe loudly, Yang did not blame him. In fact, he had already prepared for this scene in front of him. He had always heard about some of the things that his 6th brother had done. His achievements were so great that the Yang family would be implicated sooner or later. Therefore, along the way, Yang did not shout or make a fuss. He just followed the embroidered uniform guards and left Jianing Prefecture. His cooperation also saved him from physical pain. Not long after leaving Jianing, another group of embroidered uniform guards came and announced that this time it was Emperor Yingzong who invited him to Nanjing to be an official. With the arrival of these embroidered uniform guards, his treatment also improved. At least, no one gave him any face in front of his face. As soon as he entered Nanjing, he was placed in a small courtyard and detained, although his personal freedom was not restricted. And no one would stop him even if he wanted to go out shopping. There were always embroidered uniform guards following him. However, there were always some embroidered uniform guards following him, which made him realize that he was being watched. Thinking about it, the reason why these people did not make a move on him was probably because his sixth brother's power was flourishing. Before things were settled, they did not want to anger his sixth brother. Just like this, less than 20 days later, an imperial edict suddenly appeared in front of him. He was specially appointed by Emperor Yingzong as the general representative of the Yang family bank in southern Ming. For a time, all the embroidered uniform guards around him withdrew. This time, they really withdrew. No one came to monitor him. He, who had just regained his freedom, saw the current head of the eunuchs, Chao Jixiang, appear in front of him. First, he comforted him for a while. Then, he talked about the problem of the population trade between southern Ming and the Duke of Zhongdan. He also asked him to quickly choose a location in Nanjing, Songjiang Prefecture, and Jianing Prefecture, and then raise money. Although it was mostly used to describe women, it could also be used to describe Yang's current situation. Just as Chao Jixiang left with his people, a platoon of cold soldiers appeared in front of him. The person leading them was the platoon leader, Silver Tiger. This person had stayed in the Yang family manor outside Baiming's capital and was one of Yang Chendong's trusted subordinates. Silver Tiger's arrival was not only to protect fourth master Yang's safety, but also to help him prepare the Yang family bank. Many contacts with the security bureau had to go through his hands. This was not because Yang Chendong did not trust his fourth brother, but because he did not want his fourth brother to be involved in dangerous matters. The news that southern Ming was going to trade people with the mercenaries spread like a gust of wind. For a time, the various powers had different reactions. When the news reached Baiming, Zhu Qiyu, who was the acting head, was silent at first. Then, he loudly reprimanded Zhu Qizhen in front of his civil and military officials. Since the founding of the Great Ming, our Great Ming has benefited tens of thousands of people. We are determined to let them live a good life. When did we ever trade people? This Zhu Qizhen clearly doesn't care about the rules of our ancestors. At this moment, Zhu Qiyu was already on the same level as Zhu Qizhen. He no longer called him Great Master Ing like before. At the very least, he would call him elder cousin. Instead, he directly called him by his name. Zhu Qiyu sat on the golden dragon throne and raged. The officials below all lowered their heads and did not say anything. When the Great Ming was first established, there were indeed some rules. For example, there were no political marriages, no tribute, the Son of Heaven guarded the country, the king died for the country, and so on. This was already a lot more unyielding compared to other dynasties. However, there was no such thing as trading people was prohibited in these rules. Not to mention, in order to survive, the southern Ming even gave the title of king with a different surname. What did it matter if they traded people for military funds? Chapter 543. It was said that southern Baiming was of the same origin, but in reality, they were already two different countries. What would southern Ming do? How could they still care about Baiming's attitude? All of the courtiers were clear about this matter, so no one would foolishly accuse him of anything. They would just let the emperor vent his dissatisfaction. Not to mention, they didn't know whether this dissatisfaction was due to jealousy. Perhaps Daizong also wanted to trade with the people to get some money to spend. After all, who would complain about having more money in the national treasury? Although Baiming had already started paying business taxes, just Immortal Abode, Sky Beyond Heaven, and Yang Family Bank paid a lot of business taxes every month. Now, they were also doing business with Walla. Baiming was heavily taxed. This made Baiming's national treasury much more abundant than southern Ming's. It was just that during this period of time, because of the development of the cannons and guns, they had spent quite a lot of money. More importantly, the progress was still very slow. Based on the current speed, it was unknown how much money they would have to invest in order to achieve results. If there was a new source of income, Zhu Qiyu would definitely be very happy. After Zhu Qiyu said all this, it was possible that the grapes were sour because they couldn't eat them. Once southern Ming became strong with money, it was also possible that they would threaten Ming. As for which one it was, who among the officials could say for sure? No one said anything. This made it difficult for Zhu Qiyu to continue his plan of using this matter to ruin Zhu Qizhen's reputation. He, who was already a bit upset, could only wave his hand and announce that the court was dismissed. All of the officials knelt and said, "Long live the emperor." Then they left. Only Jin Ing, the chief eunuch, stood there without moving. He was originally supposed to serve the emperor. Since Zhu Qiyu didn't leave, he naturally didn't dare and couldn't leave. Beloved official Jin, don't you think Zong's actions are inappropriate? Now that there were no outsiders, Zhu Qiyu was no longer as angry as before. On the contrary, she was very calm and even changed the way she addressed Zhu Qizhen. Jin Ing, who was standing respectfully at the side, was also somewhat unsure of Zhu Qiyu's thoughts. After all, things had happened too quickly. The news had just spread over there, and Zhu Qiyu had already flown into a rage. Jin Ing didn't have time to understand too much. Now that he was asked, he could only speak in a probing tone. "Your Majesty, why don't this official find some people to punish that person in the south?" There's no need for that. Zhu Qiyu hesitated for a while, but in the end, she rejected this method. Presumably, there are some things that we don't need to do, and there will be others who will do it. After thinking through everything, Jin Ing only hesitated for a moment before replying, "Your Majesty, the Southern Ming dynasty has just experienced internal strife and war, so there are more refugees. However, we have always been peaceful here and don't have that many idle people. Of course, there are still quite a few of them in the prison. They are all criminals who committed crimes during the rebellion in the capital. If we were to gather them together, we would be able to gather 50,000 of them. Most importantly, they are mostly adult men." The last sentence was to tell, or perhaps remind Zhu Qiyu, that although there weren't many idle people, they were the most valuable people. One person could be exchanged for 50 taels of silver. 50,000 people would be 2,500,000 taels of silver. Yes, we still have to deal with the matter of public order. It's true that we don't have internal strife in Ming, but we have to take precautions. It was clear that Zhu Qiyu wasn't very satisfied with the number of 50,000 taels. After all, it wasn't even 10 million taels of silver. The effect it could have was still too small. Hearing that they had to deal with public order, that meant that they had to punish more people. If that was the case, there would be more criminals in the future. Then they could make a large sum of money in transactions. Jin Ing, who understood the emperor's meaning, quickly nodded and said, "Yes, I will discuss this matter with Minister Su of the Ministry of Justice." Good. He didn't say much and only nodded slightly. After all, as the emperor, he couldn't be too unsightly when eating. It could be said that Zhu Qizhen's actions had provoked Zhu Qiyu a little. He was worried that the Southern Ming dynasty would suddenly develop after obtaining large amounts of gold and silver. For this, he also needed to expand his financial resources. Otherwise, the strength of the two sides might develop in the wrong direction. However, no one would have thought that because of Zhu Qizhen's human trafficking, the public order in Ming had improved greatly. Some of the Ming men, who usually stole chickens and dogs and committed crimes, were often thrown into jail because of small crimes. Unless their families were willing to spend money to redeem them, no one else had any intention of letting them out. As these people were arrested, more people were alerted. The public order in the city and on the streets gave people a new feeling. Min Palace. Min King Zhu Huiping also received news about the human trafficking in the southern Ming dynasty. Compared to Baiming's emperor, Zhu Qiyu, who wanted to wait and see, his attitude was much more direct. Send someone to check if there are any homeless people who don't have enough to eat in our territory. Also, arrest those who should be arrested. Don't be polite. In addition, send someone to Jiaoji and contact the Duke of Zhongdan to see if he is interested in trading with us. Even though he knew that doing this would attract the reprimand and dissatisfaction of some so-called scholars and even old teachers, Zhu Huiping, who wanted to develop, didn't care so much. Originally, he and the southern Ming dynasty had a hostile relationship. Now that the enemy had reached this step and the treasury was full, they were about to become stronger. Then why couldn't he also take advantage of this matter? However, Min King's faction was in the process of expansion and stabilization. They also needed a large number of people to farm or work. There really weren't any extra people. All right, this wasn't a big deal. Those who were willing to work hard would be used first, but those who were idling around had to be captured. Once enough people were gathered, they would naturally be able to trade with the mercenaries for gold and silver. Therefore, after Baiming, the public order in most of Yunnan, Guangxi, and Guangdong under Min King's faction had improved. This was something that Yang Qindong didn't expect before. At this time, Yang Qindong also received news from the front. When he learned that the southern Ming dynasty wanted to take out more than 4 million people to trade with him, he was stunned at first. Then he laughed happily. Originally, he thought that even if something as big as human trafficking could be done because of the existence of those old teachers, there wouldn't be much success in the beginning. Even if Zhu Qijin lacked money, he couldn't go too far in the environment where the Confucians were the center. It was just that he never thought that Zhu Qijin would be so bold when doing things. He actually transacted more than 4 million people in one go. This was completely beyond his expectations, and he never thought that it would happen. Immediately send a ship to Qiqian City to inform Yuqian. Tell him to send more silver. Also build more houses and prepare more clothes and food. Also, inform the Navy to prepare more transport ships. The more the better. Yang Qindong excitedly stood up and continuously gave orders to Tiger's Mane, who was standing at the side. "Oh, right, call Yang San over." This time, so many people came at once. It is impossible for the southern Ming dynasty to not arrange for spies. Tell him to arrange people to keep an eye on suspicious people. Don't let the situation in Qiqian City be exposed. Yang Qindong thought for a while and added, Chapter 544. This time, there were more than 4 million people involved in the transaction. With such a large population, it would be too much work to completely screen out the spies sent by the Southern Ming Empire. Since that was the case, it would be better not to screen them but to control them from the source. Once they entered Crimson City, they would not be released until they were thoroughly investigated. This way, even if the spies obtained the information they wanted, it would be useless if they could not upload it to Ryukyu Island. With so many Han citizens in his hands, it was obvious that the manpower in Crimson City would definitely be sufficient. As long as these newcomers were given time to get used to each other, it would not be long before a large number of useful people would appear under him. At that time, it would be time for him to expand greatly. Tiger's Mane went out to handle some matters. Yang Qindong was still a little excited and could not sit still. Looking at Beta Persei standing beside him, he seemed to have thought of something and asked, "Oh, right, is there any news from the Lansong Kingdom?" "Young master, not yet," Beta Persei said in a low voice. He had no choice but to lower his voice. His voice was a little too loud. if he did not lower his voice, who knew if he would be frightened by the young master. If that happened, the young master would be scolded again. Not yet. Then go and tell the messenger in charge of contacting the Lansang kingdom to give them 10 days. If there is still no news, then we will have to go and capture them ourselves. With so many Han citizens, Yang Chendong could be said to be full of confidence. If the Lansang kingdom wanted to continue to be perfunctory, he did not mind sending troops to destroy them. Although the time was not completely ripe yet, if he squeezed a little, it could be considered as barely occupying another country. Yang Chendong's tone became a lot more vigorous. When the news reached the Kanglin kingdom, King Paiyasai became nervous. Who was Yang Chendong? He was the general of the mercenary army. The powerful Jiaoji kingdom had been destroyed so easily. In comparison, in terms of military strength, they were slightly weaker than Jiaoji, although he did not want to admit this fact. Previously, Jiaoji was the scapegoat for sending assassins to assassinate Yang Chendong, and was annihilated just like that. Now, that Fan Yuhai was in Kanglin Kingdom. This excuse absolutely could not fall into the hands of the other party. General Sang Wang was called, and Paiyasai inquired about it. Sang Wang La, the representative general of the Laos, was just like Ladi, the general of the Laos who had fallen into a trap. The only difference was that he was representing the interests of the Laos. Your Majesty, General Sisi is having a meeting with General Fan Yuhai. It's just that according to the news from the front, some of what General Fan said is not without reason. Sang Wang La first bowed to Paiyasai, then told him what he had just learned. The so-called General Sexy is also one of the famous generals of the Lansang Kingdom. He represents the interests of the old dragon clan. What did General Fan Yuhai say? Paiyasai asked with a deep expression. Your Majesty, General Fan, said that since the mercenaries can find a reason to annihilate Jiaoji, they can also find a reason to deal with our Lansang Kingdom in the future. In other words, this war will be fought sooner or later. Since that's the case, why don't we take advantage of the fact that the enemy is tired from the battle and suddenly attack? At least we will have the upper hand, and General Fan Yuhai will fully support us when the time comes. It's equivalent to having one more ally and more strength. Sang Wang La said as he carefully observed King Paiyasai's expression. King Paiyasai fell silent when he heard this. How could he not know this? In the words of the Han people, this was called, without the lips, the teeth would feel cold. However, the mercenaries were pressing him. If he did not hand over Fan Yuhai, he would be in trouble. The current Lansang Kingdom was not ready for war yet. Especially after the defeat of General Ladi's 100,000 soldiers, the entire kingdom was afraid of war when the mercenaries were mentioned. If they did not get rid of this fear, how could they fight the next war? Seeing Paiyasai standing there in silence, Sang Wang La spoke softly. Sang Wang La, who was watching from the side, whispered, Your Majesty, why don't we tell the mercenaries that Fan Yuhai escaped with his soldiers and we didn't catch him? This way, at least on the surface, they will not be able to find trouble with us. Unless they want to deal with us in the first place, then there is no need for a reason at all. Is that okay? Paiyasai asked without confidence. Why not? To put it bluntly, we are already giving them face by doing this. We are not a vassal state of the mercenaries. Why do we have to listen to them? We have already done our part by giving them a way out. Again, unless they really want to be our enemy, then no matter what we do, we will not be able to avoid a war. On the other hand, if they don't intend to use force against us, they won't make things difficult for us over this matter. After all, they are still 20,000 soldiers, and they are the most elite soldiers of Jiaoji. They are a force to be reckoned with, Sang Wang La said with a confident look on his face. In fact, since the mercenaries sent people to ask about Fan Yuhai, the relationship between the two sides became tense. Everyone knew that there would be a war between them sooner or later. It was just that the result of this war was sooner or later. Since that was the case, there was no need to make any concessions. At most, they would just fight. At least if they fought now, they would have 20,000 more soldiers. On the other hand, if they only wanted to curry favor with the mercenaries, Fan Yuhai's 20,000 soldiers would not be easy to deal with. The Lan Song kingdom did not know how much they would have to pay. All right, then go and arrange for someone to talk to the mercenary emissary. Right? Tell the army to be on alert. King Paiyasai touched his forehead and said with a headache, "Where did these mercenaries come from? How did they suddenly appear and destroy his neighbor, Jiaoxi?" All of this happened too quickly, and the pressure it gave him was too great. It actually made him feel like he was in a dilemma. Yang Chendong, who was in the neighboring country, received news about the Lan Song kingdom 2 days later. After hearing the reply, he laughed and put the matter aside. The Lan Song king was also smart. He knew that there would be a war between them sooner or later, so he did not agree to his request. That was fine. He could just put it aside first. It was just an extra 20,000 soldiers from Fan Yuhai, so the mercenaries did not put them in their eyes. As for not looking for trouble now, it did not mean that they would not look for trouble in the future. The most important thing now was to get the 3 million Han people to Ryukyu Island first. Yang Chendong retracted his gaze from the Lansang kingdom and even called back the representative he had sent. He ordered the Security Bureau to send back the news from the Songjiang prefecture of the southern Ming Empire in a timely manner. After requesting an update every day, he placed all his attention on the integration of the army. After the destruction of the Huang bandits and the Battle of Jiaoxi, the 2nd Regiment of the Cold Front and a few auxiliary battalions had expanded to more than 10,000 people. After the accumulation of military achievements and the improvement of personal military qualities, the auxiliary soldiers had the opportunity to become Cold Front soldiers. After the various tests began, more and more people with the ability to pass the test joined Lung Feng's team. The auxiliary soldiers' assessment to become Cold Front soldiers was given to the 2nd Regiment Commander Luo Pe and Political Commissar Kong Jia. Yang Chendong's main focus was on the officers' assessment. One of the most important points was the establishment of the 3rd Regiment of the Cold Front. Yes, now that the 3rd Regiment of the Cold Front, 3 battalions, and a regiment, a total of 1,300 people, had been established, it was time to choose a new regiment commander. There were 3 candidates for the position of regiment commander. They were the original 1st Battalion Commander Wu Sheng, 2nd Battalion Commander Chen Bo, and 3rd Battalion Commander Kong Chuanxin. Whether it was the destruction of the Huang bandits or the Battle of Jiaoxi, the 3 battalion commanders had performed well. If not for the fact that the Cold Front was not strong enough, all 3 of them would have had the qualifications to be regiment commander. However, since the 3rd Regiment of the Cold Front was newly established, there was only one position for regiment commander. Naturally, it was impossible for all 3 of them to be regiment commanders. In the end, Yang Chendong made some choices and balanced them out, promoting the 3 battalion commanders to different degrees. After the reshuffling, the 2nd Regiment commander was still Luo Pe, who was also the commander of the 2nd Regiment's 1st Battalion. Political Commissar Kong Jia was still the same. The original 3rd Battalion Commander Kong Chuanxin was promoted to the 2nd Regiment's Chief of Staff, becoming a Deputy Regiment Commander. The position of 3rd Battalion Commander was given to 1st Company Commander Tian Su, who had performed the best. The new regiment commander of the 3rd Regiment, Wu Sheng, was also the commander of the 3rd Regiment's 1st Battalion. Political Commissar Chen Bo was also the commander of the 2nd Battalion. 3rd Battalion Commander Chen Yang, who was originally a company commander of the 2nd Battalion, was also promoted. In addition, the original reconnaissance company was promoted to a reconnaissance battalion, and the 1st Battalion commander was Su Yunsheng, who was originally a company commander. After the reshuffling, Wu Sheng, Chenbo, and Kong Chuanxin were promoted to regiment commander and deputy regiment commander, respectively. It was a happy ending for everyone. Don't worry about scarcity, worry about inequality. There were only so many positions, so it was no wonder that Yang Chendong wanted to divide the spoils. Having been in the army before, he knew very well that the relationship between officers was that of good buddies and iron comrades in arms. But at the same time, there was also a competitive relationship. If this subtle relationship was not handled well, it could lead to a big mistake. Fortunately, Yang Chendong's prestige was enough. After this distribution, everyone was happy. Even Chief of Staff Kong Chuanxin, who was only promoted by half a rank, didn't show the slightest displeasure. This made Yang Chendong feel relieved. The original 1 regiment of Cold Front was expanded into 2 regiments. At this moment, the auxiliary troops also grew stronger. Originally, there were only 12 battalions. Even after transferring a regiment of soldiers to Lungfeng, they still managed to expand to 15 battalions due to the temporary addition of auxiliary soldiers. On the other hand, the temporary auxiliary troops were reduced from the original 14 battalions to 6 battalions. After passing the test, they would directly become auxiliary troops. You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.